Hey guys, tonight we drift along the slow waters of the Nile, and right away you can smell something drifting in the air that is not the river mud, not the reeds, not even the faint smoke of clay hearths. It's sweet and powdery, almost dizzying, like a perfume that has been turned into a liquid you might actually sip. You're sitting cross-legged in the dim light of an Egyptian courtyard, and someone places a cup in your hand. It's not wine, it's not beer, it's something else entirely. An infusion made from lotus petals, delicate blossoms that float across ponds and temple pools. You lift the cup, and the fragrance alone makes your head tilt back. And for a moment, you think, this is probably the sort of thing you shouldn't drink if you plan on making good decisions tomorrow morning. But of course, you probably won't survive this little adventure anyway. So what's one sip more? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching, go ahead and tell me where you're from and what time it is for you right now. It's always a little surreal to imagine someone across the world at 3 a.m, drifting into sleep while wandering through ancient Egypt with me. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Egyptians loved their lotus. You might think of it only as a pretty flower, something to carve onto temple walls or to tuck into garlands for banquets. But here, you're discovering that the petals, and sometimes even the seed pods, found their way into cups. You lean closer and the liquid is faintly tinted. Pale blue if it's made from the famous blue lotus. Slightly more translucent if from the white. The taste? Somewhere between faintly bitter tea and a sugary syrup left too long in the sun. People swore it relaxed the body, calmed the mind, and perhaps even opened a doorway to something deeper. Some cups of lotus infusion weren't simply bedtime teas. They were invitations to float into altered states, half dream, half vision, where the gods might brush your shoulder with a whisper. As you sip, you realize you're part of a practice as old as the Old Kingdom itself. The lotus wasn't just decoration, it was bound to rebirth in eternity. You've seen it painted in the tomb of Tutankhamun, where his golden mask carries the image of the flower. The plant closes at night and opens in the morning sun. A perfect little metaphor for life, death, and resurrection. Drinking it wasn't only about taste, it was about drawing that cycle into yourself, daring to borrow a fragment of eternity. Of course, here comes the cheeky reality check. You're sitting here in a courtyard surrounded by buzzing flies, the heat clinging to your skin, and you're being handed an unfiltered brew made from petals scooped out of a temple pond where people wash their feet, toss offerings, and occasionally lose track of where the sacred fish are supposed to be. You raise the cup anyway, because this is Egypt, and refusing might get you side-eyed by a priest who is, frankly, already sweating in his linen kilt. You tell yourself the petals must kill whatever lurks in the water. But you know deep down, no, that's not how any of this works. Still, you drink. The effect is subtle, not the wild swing of strong wine, but more like a slow fog crawling over the edges of your vision. You notice the way the musicians' flutes sound softer, the drum beats vibrating deeper inside your chest. A priest with shaven head mutters prayers while tracing symbols in the air, and you can't help but wonder, is it the lotus or just the power of suggestion making you feel like you're gliding out of your body? Historians still argue whether these lotus infusions truly had psychoactive properties, or whether the ancients simply believed they did. Some say the blue lotus contains compounds that could shift consciousness. Others insist it was nothing more than placebo, ritual, and atmosphere doing the heavy lifting. You imagine a group of scholars leaning over faded papyri, debating whether this flower was an ancient narcotic or just ancient hype, and you picture the Egyptians rolling their eyes from the afterlife, as if to say, we drank it, we danced, we saw the gods. What more proof do you need? The quirky part, of course, is how versatile the flower became. Not only did they drink it, they steeped it into oils, pressed it into perfume, and even tucked it into pillows for a kind of aromatic dream therapy. Can you imagine lying down with your head on a pillow stuffed with crushed petals, inhaling that sweet, honey-like fragrance all night? Maybe you'd wake convinced you'd seen Osiris in your sleep, handing you some vague advice about being nicer to your neighbor's goat. You notice the setting around you changing as the lotus drink seeps through your veins. The courtyard torches flicker in slow rhythm. Women wearing elaborate wigs pass cups to men in white kilts, and laughter carries under the night sky. You catch the gleam of copper vessels, the clink of faience cups. The drinks keep flowing, and you realize this isn't just a small taste. It's a central piece of Egyptian feasting culture. Beer filled the masses, wine fed the elite, but lotus infusions whispered to the soul. Your body grows heavy, your limbs a little loose, and you feel both lulled and strangely awake at once. It's easy to see why Egyptians tied this flower to ideas of rebirth. After all, you already feel halfway to the underworld and back, and in this twilight, you realize you're experiencing something both ordinary and divine. The way humans, across time, turn plants into potions, hoping to sip eternity one swallow at a time. You glance into your cup again, petals floating at the rim. The liquid catches the torchlight, and for a fleeting second you almost expect the surface to part. A tiny papyrus boat emerging, carrying some god who leans down to tell you secrets about the world. But it's just your reflection rippling, wide-eyed, a little dazed, and very much alive, for now. The night continues, the cups keep passing, and you lean back, the taste lingering faintly sweet, faintly bitter, faintly otherworldly. This is only the first drink in Egypt's long, strange menu, and already you're wondering, what on earth have you gotten yourself into? You're still drifting in the lotus haze, when someone tugs your sleeve and presses another cup into your hand. This one looks different, heavier, frothy in a way that no delicate flower brew could ever be. The smell hits you before the liquid does. Yeasty, tangy, like bread left too long in a hot room. You tip it cautiously and foam coats the rim thick as porridge. Welcome to the true heartbeat of Egyptian drinking culture. Beer of the Nile. Forget your modern craft ales. Forget chilled lagers. What you're holding is cloudy, murky, and full of floating bits that may or may not be half-chewed barley. And yet, this is the drink that built pyramids, kept farmers upright, and turned festivals into chaos. You sip, and immediately the texture throws you. It's not smooth, it's grainy, almost like someone liquefied bread dough and decided to call it a beverage. The Egyptians didn't bother straining the stuff. It went straight from mash to jar to your lips. Somewhere in your teeth now, a tiny husk of barley clings defiantly, reminding you that this beer is closer to food than to drink. You chew, you swallow, you try not to make a face, and you realize that this is not a treat reserved for nobles. This is survival, plain and simple. The Nile provided the water, the fields, the barley, and the brewers, often women, turned it into the staple drink of daily life. Historical records show beer was so essential that workers on great projects, like the pyramid builders at Giza, were partly paid in it. Not coins, not promises, but jars of beer. Imagine finishing a 12-hour day of hauling limestone blocks under a merciless sun, and instead of a paycheck, you're handed a sloshing ceramic jug and told, "Here, this will do." And the thing is, it did. Beer provided calories, hydration, and a bit of a buzz to soften the misery. It was liquid bread, cheap and sustaining, and you can feel in your throat why it never disappeared from their tables. But don't let the practical side fool you. Egyptians celebrated with beer too. Temples held entire festivals that were basically excuses to drink until collapse. There's an old story about the goddess Sekhmet, who nearly destroyed humanity in a bloodthirsty rage, only to be calmed by vats of beer dyed red to look like blood. She drank until she passed out, sparing the world. It's the kind of tale you imagine priests telling, while also holding their own jars, chuckling into the foam. Now here's the part that tickles your mind. Historians still argue about how strong this beer actually was. Was it mildly alcoholic, safe enough to drink as a substitute for questionable Nile water? Or was it potent enough to leave you staggering? The surviving jars and recipes hint at both. Some brews weak and nourishing, others strong enough to warrant warnings from temple walls about drunkenness. You can practically hear scholars bickering in museum halls, waving faded hieroglyphic recipes and insisting their version of ancient beer would either barely make you tipsy or knock you flat after 2 gulps. You take another sip, and the flavor is honest. It tastes like earth and effort, like labor in the sun, like something your body thanks you for, even while your tongue hesitates. This was not meant for luxury, it was meant to keep life running, and yet there's a strange comfort in it. You can picture entire villages sharing from communal jars, children sipping weaker brews while parents guzzled stronger ones. Beer wasn't just a drink, it was a thread weaving through Egyptian society. And then there's the quirky little detail. Brewing beer often meant baking special loaves of barley bread, designed to be crumbled into water and left to ferment. So yes, someone literally invented a system where you bake bread only to drown it back into liquid and call it dinner. If you squint, it sounds ridiculous. But if you taste, you realize it worked. It provided a way to control fermentation, to measure portions, to ensure the drink was consistent enough to rely on. You can almost see women at clay ovens, baking round loaves not to eat but to later soak into frothy, bubbling jars destined for thirsty workers. The air around you smells of barley mash, slightly sour, slightly sweet. Children chase each other past brewing jars, flies hover lazily, and dogs lick up the spills from clay rims. Somewhere nearby, a man slurs a hymn to Hathor, goddess of joy, already too deep into his third cup. You realize you're not sipping a rare delicacy tonight. You're sipping the very fuel of Egyptian civilization. It may not be glamorous, but it is everywhere, unstoppable, and so embedded into daily existence that to refuse a cup would feel like refusing life itself. And as you chew another floating husk, you laugh quietly. Because really, in this world of golden tombs and hieroglyphs carved in stone, the drink that kept Egypt standing was not some elegant vintage wine. It was this cloudy, frothy, bready beer, pulled straight from the Nile's bounty and handed to you without apology. And somehow, despite everything, it does the trick. Your mouth still tastes of grainy beer when someone sidles over with a sly grin and pushes another vessel toward you. This one gleams darker, more golden, with a faint sweetness curling into the air before it even reaches your lips. The texture is smoother, the smell richer, almost cloying. You take a cautious sip, and there it is, the unmistakable syrupy tang of dates. But this isn't just juice squeezed from fruit. It's wine, the Egyptians' answer to the scarcity of grapes. They took what they had in abundance, those sticky clusters of desert sweet dates, and turned them into a drink that could slip between ritual, medicine, and indulgence. It clings to your tongue like honey, and for a moment you're not sure if it's delightful or overwhelming. Then you realize the trick. Sometimes this date wine wasn't even meant to please you. It was meant to mask. Imagine a healer sliding into the room, setting down jars of bitter ground herbs, myrrh, cumin, perhaps even crushed minerals, and knowing no one in their right mind would willingly swallow such bitterness. The solution? Stir it into fermented date wine. Suddenly the medicine doesn't taste like punishment. It tastes like dessert with a kick. You're not just drinking to ease thirst. You're drinking because your body aches, your lungs wheeze, or your skin burns with fever. And if the sweetness makes you forget the bitterness, all the better. You let the liquid roll across your teeth, and a memory flickers in your imagination. Rows of clay jars dug into sand to keep cool, each filled with bubbling, fermenting mash of dates. Some are rich and heady, saved for temple offerings or the tables of the well-to-do. Others are thinner, stretched with water, offered as medicine to the sick or weary. And you understand how versatile this fruit became, how dates, already a staple of food, also bled into the world of strange and necessary drinks. The mainstream fact here is obvious enough. Date wine was real, recorded in texts and echoed in jars unearthed from burial chambers. Archaeologists find residues of sugars and fermentation in clay, proof that people weren't just imagining this practice. But what makes you smile is how practical the Egyptians were. They didn't cling to one recipe, they experimented, adjusting to what was available, what was needed. They understood the double role of drink, to nourish and to heal. And then there's the odd little tidbit. Sometimes healers didn't stop at herbs. They'd crush in things you'd never imagine swallowing, like powdered metals, bits of resin, or dried animal parts. Wrapped in the syrupy embrace of date wine, it went down easier. The logic seemed unshakable to them. If the gods placed these materials on earth, perhaps drinking them would draw divine strength into you. You can almost see a nervous patient being coaxed to sip, grimacing as they swallow something that today would land you in the emergency room. Meanwhile, scholars still argue over just how widespread date wine truly was. Was it a staple of the common people, or was it more of a specialized product for temples and healing houses? Some argue that it couldn't have matched beer in scale, because dates were valuable, not as abundant as barley. Others push back, pointing to finds in desert oases, suggesting that for some communities, date wine was not exotic at all, but everyday. You picture professors in libraries squinting over residue analysis reports, debating how sticky sweet a jar's contents must have been, and whether Egyptians were drinking it nightly or only in special moments. You set the cup down for a moment, licking your lips, and notice how it lingers, almost coating your mouth with sugar. The sweetness feels out of place against the background of dusty courtyards and sweating bodies. Yet here it is, a reminder that Egyptians knew how to bend nature to their needs. They didn't just stop with the harvest, they transformed it, twisted it, made it serve many purposes. The air around you grows thicker, like molasses, as more jars are opened. Children hover near, watching adults sip cautiously. Someone coughs in the shadows, a healer muttering prayers while doling out another round of sweetened medicine. The scene feels both festive and clinical, indulgent and medicinal all at once. You can sense the blurred line here. A drink is never just a drink. It's food, it's healing, it's ritual, it's survival. And in Egypt, dates provided that strange in-between. Something sweet enough to disguise pain, strong enough to alter your state, sacred enough to pour out before the gods. Your head feels heavier, your breath slower. You realize that each cup you've tasted tonight, lotus, beer, now date wine, has carried you deeper into Egyptian life. Not into their temples or pyramids, not into their treasures, but into their mouths, their stomachs, their bodies. Through drink, you feel them breathing with you, their hopes and their ailments, their joys and their needs. You look again at the jar before you. The liquid shimmers darkly in the firelight, thick and inviting, and you almost imagine the date palms themselves leaning over you, whispering with their rustling fronds, "Drink, drink, and remember us." You smile, shake your head, and take another sip, knowing it's not just sweetness you taste. It's 1,000 years of ingenuity, desperation, and faith, distilled into a single cup. Your lips are still sticky from the date wine when another vessel is offered. This time lighter in tone, almost glowing amber in the lamplight. You lift it, and the smell is gentle and familiar. Honey, sweet, golden, viscous, the stuff you've smeared on toast or stirred into tea. But here, it's something more. The Egyptians called it the tears of Ra, drops of the sun god himself, and they poured it into everything they could. Tonight it's been mixed into water, forming a shimmering elixir that looks deceptively simple. You swirl the cup, and the light bends across the surface as if it's holding some hidden promise. You take a sip, and the flavor rushes across your tongue. Bright sweetness, faintly floral, and beneath it the murky undertone of the Nile water it tried so hard to mask. You cough quietly, because the truth is that this honey water isn't just about pleasure. It's practical. Imagine the Nile in flood, its banks churning with silt, its currents pulling along fish, debris, and all manner of things best left unnamed. That same water found its way into jugs, and no amount of clay filtering could strip away the earthy taste. Honey provided the disguise, smoothing over what was unpleasant and making a questionable drink bearable. You take another sip and you realize this isn't just sweetness, it's survival in a jar. Honey had always been precious in Egypt. It wasn't easy to gather. Bees nested in pottery hives and hollowed logs, and beekeepers risked countless stings to scrape away combs. What they retrieved was not merely food. It was medicine, perfume, offering, and preservative. Egyptians placed jars of honey in tombs, believing it would last forever. And remarkably, archaeologists have found some still edible after thousands of years. You picture priests carrying honey into temple chambers, drizzling it into the mouths of statues, or mixing it into libations poured before painted gods. And then you picture ordinary families using it as a quick fix, a way to make the rough taste of daily water or beer just a little more pleasant. As you drink, a memory from the past brushes against you. Somewhere in the Old Kingdom, a man with a rasping throat lies coughing. His wife stirs honey into warm water, whispers a prayer, and holds it to his lips. The sweetness coats his throat, the warmth soothes his chest. Did it cure him? Perhaps not, but for that moment, it gave comfort. And maybe comfort was enough. And here comes the quirky detail. Honey wasn't only stirred into water. Sometimes Egyptians mixed it with blood, not human blood, but that of animals, combined with honey as part of strange healing rituals. To us, it sounds grotesque, but to them it carried a certain logic. If honey was divine and blood was life, then together they might chase away sickness. Imagine being offered that cup, thick and red beneath the sweetness, and trying not to gag as you swallowed. You glance at the golden liquid in your hands now, suddenly grateful that yours is pure. Of course, scholars still argue about whether honey water was a daily staple or a luxury for the few. Some believe it was widespread, cheap enough to use for masking water taste, especially in rural areas. Others insist it was too valuable, too carefully stored, more often reserved for offerings, medicine, or the tables of those with means. The archaeological record doesn't give a clear answer. We find jars labeled with honey residues, but the context rarely tells us who truly drank it and how often. You imagine experts hunched over sticky sherds, debating whether the substance inside once soothed a coughing farmer or graced the lips of a pharaoh. Your surroundings hum with that soft buzz of sweetness. Children dip their fingers into honey jars, giggling as mothers scold them. A priest tips a measure into water, stirring slowly, chanting words meant to keep illness away. You take another drink, and the smooth coat of honey seems to soothe even your modern throat. Dry from too many dusty courtyards and smoky lamps, there is a comfort in its simplicity. Just sun, flower, bee, and water, all bound into something golden. The night around you feels warmer, softer, as though the honey itself seeps into the air. You close your eyes for a moment and almost hear the bees buzzing, the faint hum of hives lined along a temple wall. The drink is not glamorous, not intoxicating, but it is steady, reliable, a reminder that sweetness can soften even the harshest edges of life. And as the cup empties, you realize you've just tasted another layer of Egypt. Not the glory of kings, not the magnificence of temples, but the small kindness of a sweetened sip, handed from one tired hand to another. The sweetness of honey still lingers in your throat when you're suddenly offered something very different, heavier in body and richer in memory. The cup pressed into your hand feels warmer than the night air, and when you tilt it, the liquid inside clings to the rim in pale streaks. You sniff cautiously and recognize the unmistakable scent of milk. Only, it's not the chilled carton from a refrigerator you're imagining. This is raw, earthy, pulled straight from the animal only hours ago and poured into clay jars that have already absorbed years of use. In ancient Egypt, milk wasn't just one thing. It could come from cows, from goats, from sheep, and, most surprisingly for you, sometimes even from donkeys. Each variety carried its own texture, its own symbolic weight, and its own place in ritual or daily life. You take a tentative sip, and it's nothing like what you're used to. Warm, slightly sour, full-bodied, it coats your tongue with a texture closer to cream than to the smooth uniformity you expect. And then you remember, there's no refrigeration here, no sterile bottling process. This milk has been sitting in a clay jar in the Egyptian heat, probably strained through woven reeds to pull out the worst of the hair or debris, and handed to you with all the trust in the world. You wince, but swallow, and feel it settle in your belly like something far more substantial than a drink. Egyptians treated milk with reverence. Cows were sacred to Hathor, the mother goddess, often depicted with horns and a solar disk. Drinking cow's milk could carry religious meaning, a symbolic sip of divine nourishment. Goat's milk was more common in villages, easier to obtain, more affordable. Sheep milk, too, appeared in certain households. And donkey's milk, that was considered particularly pure, almost medicinal. Ancient physicians recommended it for healing, and later cultures would claim Cleopatra herself bathed in it to keep her skin supple, a detail that might make you smile as you sip from your humble jar tonight. As you glance around the courtyard, you notice children being handed small cups of milk, their mothers watching carefully, hoping it strengthens their bodies. For infants who could not be breastfed, animal milk became a substitute, though often mixed with water or softened bread. To us it might sound risky, but to them it was life-saving. You picture a young mother in a mud brick home, cradling her child with one arm while stirring warm goat's milk with the other, whispering a prayer to Hathor to guard her little one's health. And here's where the quirky detail slips in. Egyptians sometimes blended milk with beer or wine, a concoction that sounds horrifying to your modern palate. Thick, sour, and fermented, it was thought to cure certain stomach troubles or provide extra nourishment. Imagine the frothy mess of barley beer colliding with curdled milk, someone insisting it would soothe your ailments while you stare at the cup in horror. And yet people drank it, trusting in the wisdom passed down from healer to healer. Still, scholars argue over just how common milk drinking really was. Was it widespread among the population, or was it primarily for children, the sick, and ritual offerings? Some argue that Egyptians favored beer so heavily that milk was secondary, even rare, while others point to the numerous references in medical texts and temple rituals suggesting it played a far greater role than we tend to assume. The debate lingers, unresolved, a reminder that what we think of as daily life in ancient times often slips through the cracks of evidence. You take another sip, and the sour tang clings to your tongue, but the heaviness in your belly feels oddly grounding. It's a reminder that drinks weren't always about indulgence or escape. Sometimes they were about sustenance, about feeding the body as much as quenching thirst. And sometimes they were about drawing a line between the human and the divine. You look up, and the scene unfolds around you. Priests pouring bowls of cow's milk onto temple altars, farmers milking goats at dawn while the Nile mist still lingers, wealthy women dabbing their skin with cloths dipped in donkey's milk, swearing it keeps their beauty eternal. Milk in all its forms flowed through Egypt, not as a single drink, but as many, each sip carrying the weight of nourishment, ritual, and imagination. The jar in your hand empties slowly, and you set it down, your lips sticky, your stomach heavy. You've tasted another strange Egyptian drink, and with it, stepped further into their world, where even the simplest of liquids could hold layers of meaning, from the divine to the everyday. Your stomach is still heavy with milk when someone stumbles toward you carrying a vessel that looks less refined. Its clay rim sticky, its body damp with condensation even in the warm night. The man grins, teeth stained from chewing something sweet, and tips the jar your way. When you bring it to your lips, the first thing that hits you is the raw sugar scent, rich and cloying, followed by a faint yeasty fizz that tickles your nose. You hesitate, then sip, and suddenly the sweetness collides with a sharp bite, something wild and unpredictable. You've just been introduced to one of Egypt's more dangerous delights, palm sap fermentations. Picture a date palm, towering against the skyline, its fronds rustling in the desert wind. Farmers would climb it, cut into the tender part near the crown, and coax the sap to drip into containers below. At first it was sweet, almost like nectar, a refreshing tonic on its own. But leave it for a day or two in Egypt's heat, and it would begin to bubble. Fermentation set in, and what began as syrupy juice turned into something far less innocent. Palm sap became an intoxicating drink, foamy and sharp, beloved by some, cursed by others. You sip again, and the taste is both fascinating and alarming, sweet at the start, sour at the finish, and strong enough to leave your head spinning if you dared more than a few gulps. You can almost see the process in front of you. Clay jars, lined along shaded courtyards, each filled with dripping sap, buzzing with flies that can't resist the sugar. The air thickens with the smell of molasses and yeast. Someone lifts a lid, peers inside, and nods as bubbles rise. By evening, the neighborhood gathers with cups in hand, ready to taste. Some laugh and clap after a sip. Others grimace, clutching their stomachs, already regretting it. Palm sap was never predictable. Sometimes it stayed sweet. Sometimes it soured quickly. Sometimes it became so strong it could lay you flat after only a jar. Here's the fascinating part. Palm sap wasn't only consumed fresh. Egyptians also used it in concoctions, blending it with herbs or mixing it into other drinks to create something entirely new. Imagine combining the fizz of palm wine with honey, or steeping it with resin for a bitter medicinal draught. The possibilities were endless, and the risks equally so. You can picture a healer insisting it would cure stomach worms, while a farmer drank simply to forget how much his back ached. And then there's the quirky little twist. Sometimes the fermenting sap produced so much foam that it overflowed the jars, leaving sticky puddles across courtyards. Children darted in to scoop it up, licking the froth like forbidden candy, their mothers shouting warnings that didn't stop them in the least. It's a strange image. Kids covered in sap foam, laughing, while the adults swayed tipsy on the stronger liquid. Yet scholars still debate how central palm sap really was to Egyptian drinking culture. Some argue it was widespread, especially in regions where date palms flourished, forming part of the everyday diet. Others suggest it was more localized, even rare, pointing to limited archaeological evidence compared to beer or wine. Was it a staple drink? Or was it a regional curiosity that only certain communities relied upon? No one agrees, and the question lingers unanswered, like the sticky sweetness clinging to your lips tonight. You tilt the jar again, and the liquid burns slightly at the back of your throat. There's something raw and untamed about it. Nothing refined or elegant. No careful filtering. It's nature captured in a clay pot, impatient, bubbling, refusing to be contained. You feel a slow warmth creeping through your chest, spreading into your arms, and you realize how easy it would be to drink too much, to lose yourself in this volatile brew. Around you, the night grows louder. Men clap in rhythm, women laugh as they sway, the courtyard alive with chatter and song. A man near the palm tree pours another jar, muttering that this batch is stronger than the last. You catch his grin and wonder whether he means it as a warning or an invitation. Either way, you take another sip, your head beginning to hum in tune with the palm fronds whispering overhead. The sweetness, the sourness, the unpredictability. It all feels like a mirror of life itself along the Nile. Nothing certain, everything changing with time and heat and chance. And as you drain the cup, you realize this strange, sticky drink connects you to something both ordinary and chaotic. The human desire to take what nature offers and let it transform into something more, for better or worse. The taste of palm sap still clings to your mouth, half sweet and half sour, when another tray of jars is set down before you. This time the colors are richer, brighter, gleaming in the flicker of the torches. The liquid shines red and gold, as though someone had squeezed the sun and the desert into a cup. You lean in, and the smell is unmistakable, tart, fruity, with a sharp tang that makes your jaw tighten before you even taste. You lift the cup, and there it is. Pomegranate and fig juice, pressed and poured into clay vessels, ready to cool your parched throat. The first sip surprises you. It's thick, almost pulpy, the juice clinging to your tongue before the sharp burst of pomegranate seeds explodes in your mouth. Sweetness from figs follows quickly after, mellowing the tartness, leaving behind a strange balance that somehow feels right for the desert night. This isn't beer, and it isn't wine. It's brighter, fresher, lighter on the body even as it weighs heavy with sugar. You swallow again, and the taste blooms in your chest, like swallowing liquid sunshine. Figs and pomegranates weren't just food in Egypt. They were symbols. The fig tree was cultivated widely, its fruit feeding both peasants and kings. Pomegranates, with their hundreds of glistening seeds, symbolized fertility and abundance. You've seen them painted on tomb walls, tucked into funerary offerings, brought as gifts to temples. And here you taste why. A drink made from these fruits wasn't just refreshing, it was charged with meaning. Each sip carried whispers of life, renewal, and the cycle of growth. It's not hard to imagine an Egyptian feast, long tables laden with bread, roast fowl, bowls of lentils, and amidst it all, pitchers of fig and pomegranate juice, the air buzzing with chatter, musicians playing flutes and lyres, children darting between the legs of dancers, and you lifting a clay cup to your lips, joining in a ritual older than memory, the act of drinking not only to quench thirst, but to participate in the living pulse of community. But here's the curious twist. Sometimes this juice was fermented, allowed to bubble and strengthen just like beer or date wine. Other times, it was served fresh, squeezed on the spot, almost like a luxury treat for the hot afternoons. Which raises the question, when you sip tonight, are you tasting something harmless and refreshing? Or are you on the verge of staggering into the courtyard with your head spinning? Egyptians themselves may not have cared about the distinction. It was drink, it was fruit, it was life. And then comes the quirky little detail. Pomegranate juice wasn't only drunk. It was sometimes used as a dye, its deep red staining cloth and even leather. Imagine accidentally spilling your cup and watching the liquid bleed into linen, leaving behind a crimson blotch that never fades. You glance at your tunic nervously now, realizing one careless gulp might turn you into a walking fresco. Scholars, of course, still debate how common this drink was. Some argue that figs and pomegranates were abundant, meaning juice could have been enjoyed by many, not just the wealthy. Others suggest it was a more seasonal indulgence, reserved for feasts, offerings, or the privileged few who could afford such luxury. Archaeological finds show pomegranates tucked into tombs, but was that symbolic or evidence of regular consumption? The line between ritual and reality blurs, leaving you uncertain whether the drink in your hands was a daily staple or a rare delight. You lift the cup again and let the liquid flow over your tongue. This time you catch subtler notes, the grit of crushed seeds, the faint earthy undertone of clay. The sweetness doesn't just quench, it lingers, teasing your palate, reminding you that the fruits of the Nile Valley were not only nourishment, but joy. In a land where the sun baked the ground mercilessly, where floods could bless or destroy, to drink something so bright, so bursting with life, must have felt like stealing a moment of paradise. The courtyard around you hums with voices, Children lick their sticky fingers. Merchants boast about their harvest. Priests raise pitchers towards statues of the gods. You take another sip, and for a fleeting moment, you feel as though you're drinking the very essence of Egypt. Its fertility, its abundance, its fragile balance between feast and famine. The last drops slide down your throat, and you set the cup aside, lips stained faintly red. You've tasted something that is more than a drink. It's a promise in liquid form, a reminder that even in a world of dust and toil, sweetness still finds a way to bloom. Your lips are still stained faintly red from the pomegranate juice when another jar is pressed into your hand, heavier, darker, carrying a smell that instantly feels alien. You lean close, and the air fills with sharp, resinous tones. Woody, bitter, almost smoky, like standing too close to a burning censer in a temple. You swirl the liquid, and it glints in the torchlight, thick and brownish, not the clear brightness of fruit, not the familiar cloudiness of beer. You hesitate, and that hesitation feels justified, because this is no simple refreshment. Tonight you've been handed a steep of myrrh and resin, the kind of concoction that smells more like incense than anything you'd imagine drinking. You sip, and the bitterness coats your tongue like bark ground into syrup. Your instinct is to spit it out, but you force yourself to swallow, and the heat blooms in your throat, sliding into your chest with a medicinal weight. It doesn't soothe, it burns. You cough softly and glance around, half expecting others to laugh at your discomfort, but no one does. They nod knowingly, because here, this is not just a drink. It's a ritual, a medicine, a spiritual tool. Myrrh was everywhere in ancient Egypt. Harvested from resin that oozed from thorny shrubs, it hardened into reddish tears, traded across long desert routes, prized for its fragrance and its supposed healing power. It was burned in temples, used in embalming, mixed into perfumes, and yes, swallowed in drinks. Egyptians believed it could purify the body, ward off illness, even prepare the soul for communion with the divine. You can almost see a priest mixing ground resin into warm water or wine, whispering invocations as he stirs, handing the cup to a trembling initiate who gulps it down with both fear and reverence. As you sip again, your nose stings with the same scent you'd expect from temple smoke. You close your eyes and imagine the grand halls of Karnak, filled with the haze of burning resin, priests chanting, statues looming in flickering shadows. To drink this steep is to take that same sacred smoke into yourself, to let the gods fill your lungs and your blood. It's less about refreshment than transformation. And here comes the peculiar detail. Sometimes resin drinks were mixed with things even stranger, like powdered precious stones or ground gold. Imagine swallowing a glittering mixture, gritty against your teeth, convinced it would fortify your spirit. Did it? Perhaps not. But belief alone could make the body tremble with imagined strength. Some even claimed these brews gave visions, the bitter fumes rising from the stomach to the head, opening the mind to gods and ancestors. You glance down at your cup now, half wondering if you'll see a flicker of Osiris in the corner of your eye. Scholars today still debate the role of myrrh and resin steeps in Egyptian daily life. Were they common enough to be part of household medicine, or reserved mainly for temples and the wealthy? The evidence tilts both ways. Medical papyri list resin as ingredients for various remedies, yet archaeological finds suggest its rarity and high value. Some argue it was mostly symbolic, part of rituals rather than diets. Others insist it was practical medicine, used whenever ailments struck. The truth, like the drink itself, remains murky, thick, difficult to swallow cleanly. You cough again, setting the jar down for a moment, and your tongue tingles with lingering bitterness. The courtyard smells sharper now, as though the fumes have escaped your cup to hang in the air around you. Children give it a wide berth, wrinkling their noses, while adults sip carefully, accepting the discomfort as the price of purification. Somewhere nearby, a healer rubs resin into a wound, while another stirs it into a drink for someone feverish. The line between medicine and ritual is so thin here it's almost invisible. You take another slow sip, wincing but steady, and as the burn settles into your chest, you begin to feel something else, a strange calm, heavy, almost dreamlike. Perhaps it's just fatigue from too many cups tonight, or perhaps, in some inexplicable way, the resin does whisper to your body, telling it to rest, to quiet, to let the gods do their work. The jar empties slowly, reluctantly, each swallow a small trial. By the end, you feel both lighter and heavier, your head full of incense smoke, your stomach full of bitterness. You set the cup aside, eyes watering slightly, and realize you've just tasted another corner of Egyptian life. Not joyous, not sweet, but solemn, strange, and deeply tied to how they saw themselves in the cosmos. A drink that wasn't meant for pleasure but for connection, purification, and perhaps just enough discomfort to remind you that the divine is never reached easily. The taste of resin still clings bitterly to your tongue, a dry heaviness that refuses to leave when another vessel is pressed into your hand. This one smells more familiar, yeasty, earthy, almost comforting after the sharp sting of myrrh. You glance inside, expecting plain beer again, but then you notice the floating leaves, the tiny seeds, the odd fragments swirling in the foam. You hesitate, realizing this isn't ordinary Nile beer. This is beer mixed with herbs, a concoction that the Egyptians brewed when they wanted more than calories, when they wanted their drink to soothe or to spark, to heal or to intoxicate in new ways. You take a cautious sip, and the flavor surprises you. The bitterness of barley is still there, but now it's chased by something brighter, almost citrus-like, then mellowed with a faint sweetness. You swallow, and your throat feels warmer, your stomach calmer. You realize you might be tasting coriander or chamomile, or perhaps fenugreek, all plants known to the Egyptians, all tossed into beer not just for taste, but for what they believed were their effects. You lick your lips, curious, and sip again, trying to decipher the blend. Beer was the foundation of Egyptian drinking, but this was variation. In medical papyri, recipes appear that call for beer as the base for remedies. Add this herb for stomach pain, that one for fever, another for infections. The beer wasn't only nourishment, it was the vehicle, the solvent, the carrier that made bitter herbs easier to swallow and perhaps more effective. You imagine a healer grinding coriander seeds in a mortar, muttering as he stirs them into warm beer, handing the foaming cup to a patient with the promise that relief lay inside. Around you, the courtyard fills with the smell of brewing, the sharp aroma of herbs mingling with yeast. Someone laughs as they drink, boasting that this batch will make them stronger than ever, while another mutters that it tastes worse than medicine. You chuckle quietly, because you can see the truth in both. The herbs add something new, something layered, turning a simple peasant's drink into something that flirts with magic. And then there's the quirky little twist. Some herb beers were believed to influence not just the body but the mind. Blue lotus petals sometimes slipped into brews, adding their dreamy haze to the bready froth. Chamomile soothed the stomach, but perhaps also softened the spirit. Imagine drinking a jar that left you both tipsy and drowsy, a perfect lullaby for weary workers after endless hours under the sun. Egyptians weren't content with one effect. They tinkered, experimenting like alchemists with cups and jars, chasing a drink that could ease pain and lift the soul at once. But of course, historians still argue about whether these herbal additions were everyday practice or more specialized. Were most people drinking plain beer, while herbal versions were saved for medicine and ritual? Or was it common to flavor beer with whatever was at hand, turning each batch into a small, unique recipe? Archaeological evidence points to both possibilities. Residues of herbs found in some beer jars, but not in others. The debate lingers, unresolved, like the taste now lingering on your tongue. Half familiar, half strange. You sip again, and the bitterness makes you wince, but the warmth in your belly is undeniable. You imagine workers at a construction site, jars passed around, each with its own herbal twist, some more effective than others. Maybe one man swears coriander beer makes him strong, while another insists chamomile beer puts him to sleep. The Egyptians weren't drinking for pleasure alone. They were drinking with purpose, with belief, with the conviction that the plants of the Nile Valley held secrets ready to be unlocked in frothy clay cups. The night air grows thicker, the chatter around you louder. You watch as herbs are crushed, tossed into boiling mash, stirred with wooden paddles. The foam rises, scented now with spice and earth. You realize this isn't just brewing. It's a kind of experiment, a ritual, a search for balance between nourishment and remedy. You take another sip, chew a stray seed between your teeth, and laugh softly. Because really, you've just tasted one of Egypt's strangest drinks, and at the same time, one of its most ordinary. Your cup empties, and you set it down, the herb beer buzzing faintly in your veins. Another layer of Egypt unfolds before you. Not the golden splendor of tombs, not the solemnity of temple incense, but the everyday ingenuity of people who turn their staple drink into a canvas for healing, experimenting, and maybe just a little bit of fun. The last traces of herb-laced beer still cling to your tongue when a servant glides through the courtyard with a jar that immediately looks different. It is not the squat, common shape of the workers' beer vessels, but tall and narrow, polished, decorated with faint painted vines spiraling along its neck. The way it's carried, with both hands and deliberate care, tells you this is not an ordinary brew. The smell, as the stopper is lifted, is sharp and heady, tangy and a little sweet. A scent that lingers in the air like perfume. You lean in and realize this is wine, but not the date wine or the fig blends you've sipped already. No, this is true grape wine, imported or cultivated with difficulty, reserved almost entirely for the elite. You take a careful sip, and at once the flavor announces itself sharper, more acidic, smoother in body than beer, less cloying than date wine, but powerful. You roll it across your tongue, tasting the dryness, the faint bitterness under the sweetness. It feels intentional, cultivated, something meant to be savored rather than gulped. And that alone sets it apart in Egypt, where beer fed the masses and water was suspect. This was for nobles, for priests, for pharaohs. Wine carried status with every swallow. Wine was not native to Egypt in abundance. Grapes did grow in certain fertile regions, especially in the delta, but large-scale production required resources, land, and careful tending. Much of it had to be imported, often from places like Canaan or later from the Levant. Amphorae stamped with seals have been unearthed from tombs, showing not only the source of the wine, but even the vineyard, the vintage year. Imagine that. Ancient labels, proudly declaring their origin, as if to prove that even in death, the drinker would sip only the finest. Around you, the mood shifts as the wine flows. This isn't the raucous cheer of beer halls or the sticky chaos of palm sap fermentations. It's quieter, more dignified. Cups are smaller, movements slower. Each sip is measured, discussed, appreciated. Nobles compare flavors. Priests nod approvingly. And you, sitting among them, feel momentarily elevated just by sharing their drink. This is not a drink of survival, but of luxury. And here's the quirky twist. You discover that Egyptians sometimes mix their wine with seawater, spices, or even herbs, believing it improved the flavor or added medicinal benefits. Imagine the salty tang of brine in your cup, the strange sting of cinnamon or fennel layered on top of the already sharp grape. Would it taste refined? Perhaps not to your modern palate, but to them, it was innovation, variety, a way to mark their wine as special. Of course, scholars still debate how widespread wine drinking truly was. Some argue it was almost exclusively for the upper classes, the poor never tasting a drop except perhaps in diluted temple offerings. Others suggest that over time, as viticulture spread, more Egyptians may have had access, at least during festivals or through small local vineyards. The debate lingers like the aftertaste in your mouth. Was this truly a drink of the few, or did it trickle down, however rarely, into the cups of the many? You take another sip, and the weight of it sits differently in your body than beer. It doesn't bloat you, it sharpens you, warms you quickly. You imagine the court of a pharaoh, golden lamps flickering, musicians playing softly, platters of figs and roasted meat passed along, while wine gleams in slender cups. To drink it is to participate in power, in refinement, in a carefully crafted image of eternity. Yet, you also imagine the vineyards themselves, rows of grapevines stretching across the delta, workers stooping to harvest, feet crushing the grapes in vats, purple juice staining the ground. The labor is the same as beer brewing, sweaty and relentless. The difference lies not in the effort, but in the perception. Beer is work. Wine is prestige. You glance at your cup again, wondering how much of its flavor is truly in the grape, and how much is in the story it tells. As the jar empties, you feel the slow buzz of its strength, subtler, but deeper than beer. Around you, laughter swells softly. Nobles raise their cups in toasts, and the night folds itself around the wine's perfume. You set your cup down carefully as they do, and realize you've just tasted not only a drink, but a social marker, a liquid ladder that set Egyptians apart from one another. The taste lingers, dry and sharp, even after the cup is gone. And in that lingering, you sense Egypt again, not only in its labor and rituals, but in its desire for refinement, for something beyond survival, something that whispered of prestige, wealth, and a touch of eternity in every sip. Your head still hums faintly from the sharpness of wine when another vessel is pressed into your hands, though this one looks nothing like the elegant amphorae of the nobles. It's rough, plain, streaked with dried silt, as if it's been dipped straight into a muddy pond. You tilt it curiously, and the liquid inside is cloudy, murky, reflecting the flicker of torches with a dull gleam. When you raise it to your lips, there is no perfume of grapes, no sweetness of figs, no resinous smoke. It smells faintly of algae, earth, and damp stone. You hesitate, and then sip, and realize that what you've been given is not wine or beer at all. It's water drawn from a sacred pool. It tastes exactly as you expect. Flat, stale, carrying the mineral tang of standing too long under the sun. You cough lightly, tempted to spit it out, but the faces around you are solemn, reverent. This is no ordinary drink. Pilgrims traveled to temples and holy sites, knelt at sacred basins or springs, and drank from them, believing the water carried healing powers. The taste doesn't matter. What matters is that every swallow is a prayer, a step toward health or divine favor. Egyptians revered water not just as necessity, but as a sacred element tied to creation itself. In their mythology, the world began in the endless floodwaters of Nun, from which the first mound of land rose. To drink water from a temple basin was to sip a fragment of that cosmic origin, to draw divine essence into your body. You can imagine weary travelers dipping their hands into green-tinged pools, cupping the liquid, eyes closed as they begged the gods for relief from illness, infertility, or grief. The setting around you shifts in your mind. A great temple courtyard, columns soaring overhead, walls etched with hieroglyphs, and in the center, a pool reflecting starlight. Priests in white linen stand guard, controlling access, doling out small vessels to pilgrims who have offered prayers or sacrifices. The water is warm from the sun, buzzing with insects, carrying traces of lotus blossoms and reeds. But to those who drink, it is life, healing, protection. And here's the quirky detail. Sometimes the pools housed sacred fish, creatures believed to be divine messengers. Imagine sipping water and feeling a brush against your lips, realizing it might have swum over the very spot you're drinking from. Pilgrims didn't mind. In fact, they believed it made the water even more potent. To us, the thought of gulping pond water, flavored with fish and reeds, feels unsettling. To them, it was holy, yet scholars still argue about the practical use of this water. Was it truly drunk often, or was it mostly symbolic, sprinkled in rituals or used in small amounts for healing charms? Some evidence points to large basins designed for communal access, suggesting thousands drank from them during festivals. Others believe it was too dangerous to consume regularly, that most Egyptians relied on Nile water or beer, with temple water reserved only for ritual moments. The truth may lie somewhere in between, part daily devotion, part symbolic gesture, always tied to belief rather than taste. You sip again, wincing at the musty flavor, but then notice something else. A strange calm that comes not from the liquid itself, but from the way everyone around you treats it. Their reverence makes the act feel profound. It's not about quenching thirst. It's about participating in something larger than yourself. For a moment, you understand. Drinking isn't always about flavor or even nourishment. Sometimes it's about surrendering, about trusting that what you swallow carries more than water. It carries hope. The courtyard quiets as pilgrims bow their heads, cups lifted, torches flicker, shadows lean across stone walls. And you join them, sipping again, less for the taste than for the feeling of being part of a ritual that stretches back through centuries. The water clings to your tongue with its earthy bitterness, but in that bitterness, you sense something deeper, the persistence of faith, the willingness of people to believe that even in the murkiest cup, the gods might choose to dwell. You set the vessel down slowly, your lips damp, your body unchanged, but your mind oddly stilled. You've tasted Egypt again, not in sweetness, not in intoxication, but in faith, in the human desire to draw meaning from what is plain, to transform muddy water into a sip of eternity. The earthy tang of temple water still clings to your lips when a boy staggers past, carrying a clay jar so heavy he nearly tips sideways. He sets it down with a grunt, wipes his brow, and pries off the lid. What sloshes inside is not clear or delicate, but thick, half drink, half meal. You peer over the rim and see a slurry of barley gruel, frothy and bubbling, with chunks of grain floating lazily. It looks less like a drink and more like something halfway between porridge and soup. And yet this was one of Egypt's most reliable staples. Fermented barley gruel, drunk by workers and farmers who needed calories more than pleasure. You lift a scoop to your mouth, and it's exactly as you imagine. Heavy, coarse, sour, filling. You chew as much as you swallow, and every bite reminds you that this is not about refinement. This is fuel. Imagine hauling limestone blocks in the glare of the desert sun, your body aching, your mouth dry. Beer might refresh, water might sustain, but this gruel, this keeps you standing. It fills your stomach, stretches meager grain harvests into something that lasts. It's the kind of drink that doesn't care whether you enjoy it. It only cares that you survive another day. Barley was Egypt's backbone, one of the earliest domesticated grains along the Nile. It grew resiliently in the fertile silt after floods, and it formed the base of countless meals. When brewed lightly, it became beer. When boiled and fermented just enough, it became this thick gruel, rich with calories, eaten as much as drunk. Archaeological remains show vats and jars that once held this slurry, confirming its presence not only in households, but in the rations of laborers. The pyramid builders at Giza almost certainly gulped this mixture between hauling stones, its bulk keeping hunger at bay when bread alone wasn't enough. The scene around you comes alive with the smell of boiling mash, the hiss of clay pots pulled from fires, the sound of wooden paddles stirring. Families cluster around communal jars, dipping ladles into the froth. Children slurp noisily, grain clinging to their chins. Men scoop handfuls and swallow quickly, wiping their mouths with the backs of their hands. The courtyard feels less like a feast and more like a canteen. Practical, loud, alive. And here's the curious twist. Sometimes the gruel was intentionally left to ferment just a little longer, so that it gave not only nourishment, but a mild buzz. Imagine stumbling through your chores, belly heavy with half-solid beer, your head just light enough to make the work tolerable. It blurs the line between food and drink, between sustenance and intoxication. You chew another mouthful now and wonder if your dizziness is from the heat, the slurry, or both. Scholars still argue about whether this gruel was more a drink or a food. Was it truly classified as a beverage, or was it a meal served in liquid form? The boundary is difficult to pin down. Some argue it belonged firmly in the realm of food, while others insist it was consumed from jars, ladled like beer, therefore drunk rather than eaten. The debate highlights how slippery our categories become when faced with ancient practices. What mattered to Egyptians wasn't the label, it was that it kept them alive. You take another mouthful, forcing yourself to chew through the grain. It fills you quickly, the heaviness settling into your belly like a stone. And yet, you can see why this was so common. It didn't just hydrate, it nourished. It didn't just stave off thirst, it gave strength. For families with limited means, for workers whose bodies burned through energy faster than they could rest, this gruel was lifeblood. The courtyard hums with its presence. Women stir great vats. Men carry jars to work crews. Children lick the sticky rims. The air smells of yeast and smoke, earthy and dense. You swallow again, grimacing slightly, but also recognizing the strange comfort hidden within it. This isn't food for kings or priests. This is food for the people. The drink meal that kept Egypt standing. Your jar empties slowly, each gulp heavier than the last. By the time you set it down, your stomach aches with fullness, your throat coated with barley grit. You lean back against the wall, sighing, and realize you've just swallowed a piece of Egypt's everyday survival. It might not be glamorous, it might not be delicious, but without this thick, bubbling brew, the monuments, the temples, the entire civilization might never have stood. Your belly still feels swollen from the weight of barley gruel when someone quietly slips a new cup into your hands. You notice right away that this one smells different, softer, lighter, almost floral. No sour bite of fermenting grain, no heavy sweetness of figs, no acrid sting of resin. You lift it carefully and breathe in, and the steam carries a gentle leafy fragrance that clears your head. The liquid itself is pale, a faint greenish tint in the firelight, and when you sip, it's soothing, delicate, almost familiar. This is not beer, not wine, not a thick slurry meant to fuel builders. This is tea, or at least Egypt's version of it, steeped from reeds, peppermint, and other aromatic leaves that grew along the Nile. The taste glides smoothly across your tongue, mild at first, then opening into a cooling sensation that lingers in your throat. It's refreshing in a way none of the other drinks have been. Not heavy, not intoxicating, but cleansing. You close your eyes for a moment and let it rest in your mouth, and you imagine why Egyptians turned to these infusions. They weren't searching for calories this time, nor for divine visions, nor for the dull fog of intoxication. They were seeking comfort, healing, and calm. Peppermint, with its sharp freshness, would have been gathered from patches of wild herbs or cultivated near fields. Chamomile, with its daisy-like blossoms, offered soothing notes. Reed leaves, though less familiar to you, added body, grounding the infusion with the faint taste of riverbanks. These teas were likely brewed not just for taste, but for their believed effects on the body, easing stomach pain, calming nerves, refreshing after labor in the sun. Medical papyri record prescriptions that sound eerily similar to what you're sipping now. Boil leaves, strain them into water, drink slowly to cure a troubled belly. Around you, the mood feels different. Gone is the clamor of drunken laughter or the heavy chewing of gruel. People sit closer together, quieter, sipping in measured gulps. Mothers hand small cups to their children, encouraging them to drink before bed. Priests murmur blessings over steaming bowls, believing the herbs draw out illness or drive away evil spirits. The courtyard becomes a place of calm, and you feel yourself exhaling, shoulders loosening after the rougher drinks of the night. And here comes the quirky little detail. You hear someone nearby chuckle that peppermint leaves were sometimes chewed raw to freshen the breath, especially before speaking with superiors. Imagine an ancient Egyptian version of chewing gum, peasants plucking sprigs from fields and gnawing them nervously before reporting to overseers. You picture yourself doing the same, hoping the sharp mint would cover the smell of stale beer or onion stew. But, as with so many things, scholars still argue about the role of these herbal teas. Were they everyday comforts, common across villages, or were they more specialized, used mainly in healing houses and temples? Some argue the abundance of herbs in prescriptions shows they were widely consumed. Others counter that the written recipes belonged to elite scribes and physicians, suggesting ordinary villagers rarely had such luxury. The debate continues, each cup of residue analysis in ancient jars providing only whispers, never certainty. You sip again, and the warmth spreads down your throat, chasing away the heaviness of gruel. It's easy to imagine ending a long day with this drink, sitting by the river's edge as the sun sinks, listening to frogs croak in the reeds, watching the last light glint off temple walls. It doesn't dazzle like wine or intoxicate like palm sap. Instead, it steadies you, grounding you in the ordinary rhythm of life. The courtyard fills with the soft fragrance of steeped herbs. Women crush leaves in stone mortars, pour hot water over them, stir with reeds. Children curl up on mats, drifting to sleep with the warmth in their bellies. Even the priests, normally solemn and aloof, sip quietly, their eyes half closed. You realize this might be one of the few Egyptian drinks that bridge the worlds of rich and poor alike. Simple, calming, universal. Your cup empties, and you set it down reluctantly, wishing for one more sip of its cooling sweetness. You smile faintly, feeling lighter than you have all night. This isn't just another strange Egyptian drink. It's their version of comfort in a cup. A reminder that even in a land of gods and grandeur, people crave the same small kindnesses you do at the end of a long, exhausting day. The calm linger of mint still cools your tongue when the next jar arrives, but the scent that drifts up from it is nothing like the soft freshness you've just enjoyed. This time it's heavier, yeasty, almost sour. You peer into the rim and see a mixture that looks oddly familiar. Beer again, but different. The surface is thick with foam, and scattered across it are soggy, swollen crumbs of bread. At first you think someone has dropped their meal into the jar by mistake, but then you realize this is deliberate. You've been handed a drink that Egyptians loved in its own right. Beer blended with bread, a concoction that blurred the line even further between eating and drinking. You take a sip, and it's exactly as messy as you feared. Foam rushes over your lips, gritty with barley, while half-dissolved bread slides against your tongue. You chew, you swallow, and you cough softly, because it feels like trying to eat and drink at the same time. The taste, though, is not unpleasant. Hearty, sour, filling. It's thick enough to be a meal, frothy enough to count as drink. You imagine how appealing this would be to a worker who had neither time nor energy to sit down for both food and beer. One cup, and you had both. Bread and beer were Egypt's twin staples, so much so that they were sometimes spoken of as if they were a single thing. Together, they formed the foundation of life itself. Temples and tombs show endless images of bread being baked, beer being brewed, both offered to the gods in eternal cycles. And here, In this cup, you see them combined literally. Bread crumbled into beer, beer soaking bread. Two halves of the same foundation melted into one. Around you, the courtyard smells of yeast and oven smoke. Women break loaves deliberately, crumbling them into jars. Men stir the mixture, watching the foam rise. Children scoop handfuls with their fingers, laughing as they slurp down the froth. It's not elegant, not refined, but it's communal. Bread and beer together filled not only bellies but bonds, shared at work sites, feasts, even funerals. To eat one without the other was possible, but to combine them was practical genius. And here comes the quirky little twist. You notice that sometimes the bread was not fully baked before being tossed into the beer. Half-baked loaves, dense and sticky, soaked up the liquid faster, breaking down into a kind of slurry. Imagine sipping your drink only to discover chunks of raw dough still clinging to your teeth. To us, it might seem unpleasant, but for them, it meant efficiency. Nothing wasted, nothing lost. Of course, historians still debate whether this bread-beer mixture was a deliberate recipe or simply the result of sloppy brewing practices. Some argue it was intentional, a common method of strengthening beer, adding bulk and calories. Others believe it was more of a shortcut, a byproduct of households where bread and beer shared the same grain supply and ended up mingling naturally. The jars themselves don't tell us the intent, they only show residues of both, leaving scholars to speculate whether this was innovation or accident turned tradition. You sip again, chewing the softened bread, and your stomach fills quickly. It's more satisfying than plain beer, more digestible than hard loaves. You can imagine workers at the pyramids downing this mixture by the jar, the thick slurry keeping them upright through the brutal heat. You can picture families sitting together in small mud brick homes, sharing bowls of it when grain supplies ran low. It was both luxury and necessity, depending on how you looked at it. The air grows louder as people drink around you, foam dripping down chins, laughter bubbling up with the froth. A woman wipes her child's mouth. A man leans back wiping his beard, both satisfied. You join them, letting the heaviness settle into your belly, and realize you've just tasted another heartbeat of Egypt. Not golden, not delicate, but hearty, messy, alive. Your cup empties slowly, each gulp a struggle between swallowing and chewing. But by the end, you feel full in a way no other drink tonight has managed. You set it down, sighing, your lips sticky with yeast, your teeth lined with grain. It may not have been pretty, but it was survival, comfort, and community in one bubbling jar. You're still wiping bread foam from your chin when a new jar is carried out. This one covered with a lid decorated in painted petals. The servant lifts it carefully, as if the contents demand respect, and suddenly a rich fragrance rises into the air, floral, heady, almost intoxicating before you even take a sip. You lean closer, and the scent of lotus mingles with something else, sharper and more mysterious. The liquid inside glimmers faintly in the torchlight, its surface tinted blue and white from crushed blossoms. You realize you're being offered a mixture of lotus and blue water lily, a drink that lived somewhere between refreshment and ritual, between the real and the hallucinatory. You raise the cup and sip, and immediately the taste is strange, slightly bitter at the edges, faintly sweet in the center, and wrapped in a fragrance that feels less like flavor and more like mood. It seeps into you slowly, like smoke curling under your skin. The beer and bread drinks you've tried were heavy, grounding. This feels light, almost airy, the way your head floats as if tugged upward by invisible hands. You take another sip, and the courtyard tilts ever so slightly, torches swaying, shadows stretching longer than they should. The lotus was sacred in Egypt, tied to rebirth, the rising sun, and the promise of eternity. The blue lotus in particular appeared everywhere, painted in tombs, carved into temples, clutched in the hands of nobles on banqueting couches. It was more than decoration. It was believed to carry power. Egyptians steeped the petals into wine or beer, creating a drink that blurred the line between the physical and the divine. To drink it was to taste a piece of the gods themselves, to slip into visions where the barriers between worlds thinned. You look around, and the atmosphere has changed. Musicians play slower, their notes winding into the air like serpents. Priests sprinkle petals into jars, chanting softly. Guests sip and lean back, eyes half closed, some swaying, some laughing at nothing at all. The air smells of blossoms and smoke, and you feel your own eyelids grow heavy, not with sleep, but with something else, an openness, a widening of the mind. And then there's the quirky little twist. You hear someone whisper that blue lotus was thought to be an aphrodisiac. Suddenly, you notice the way some couples are leaning closer together, their laughter softer, their eyes shining in the torchlight. Imagine a drink that not only promised visions of gods, but also stirred human desires in the middle of a feast. You cough quietly, sip again, and wonder if you've just swallowed Egypt's version of a love potion. But, as always, scholars still argue about the true effects of blue lotus. Was it genuinely psychoactive, capable of inducing altered states, or was its power entirely symbolic, enhanced by ritual and expectation? Some researchers insist the plant contained compounds that could relax the body and shift perception. Others claim any visions were nothing more than imagination fueled by ceremony and suggestion. The debate continues, each theory tugging the cup in your hands between fact and myth. You take another sip, and the flavor clings to your tongue, floral and elusive. The torches seem to glow brighter, the air heavier with sound. You imagine a temple rite at midnight, priests gathered around a pool filled with lotus flowers, their bodies swaying as they sip this very brew, waiting for visions of gods to emerge from the shadows. You picture feasts where nobles reclined on cushions, sipping lotus wine until their laughter turned dreamlike and their gazes wandered toward eternity. The courtyard around you hums differently now. Laughter is slower, conversations dissolve into murmurs. A man nearby lifts his cup high and swears he sees the goddess Hathor dancing in the flames. Another sits silently, eyes closed, lips trembling with half-formed prayers. You're not sure whether you're imagining the strangeness or whether the brew truly has its hold on you. Either way, you drink again, and the night feels longer, fuller, stretched across some invisible line between the world you know and the one they believed in. Your cup empties more quickly than you realize, and when you set it down, your head feels light, your body both heavy and unanchored. You blink at the torches, at the painted walls, at the faces around you, and you can almost believe you've crossed into another realm. This isn't just a drink, it's a passage, a doorway, a bridge between the human and the divine. Your head is still swimming faintly with the dreamy haze of lotus when another vessel is pushed into your hands. Though this one looks less mystical and far more humble. The clay is chipped, the rim uneven, and when you tilt it, the liquid inside sloshes with a sour, almost vinegary smell. You bring it cautiously to your lips, and the taste confirms it. Sharp, biting, tangy in a way that makes you pucker. This isn't the sweet comfort of honey, or the dreamy haze of blue lotus. This is what happens when drinks go wrong, or perhaps when people decide that wrong can be useful. You've just tasted one of Egypt's oddest brews. Sour, vinegar-like drinks born from spoiled beer or fruit fermentations. The flavor is harsh, and you cough softly, wiping your lips. Around you, no one seems embarrassed. In fact, they sip with casual acceptance. Because in Egypt, where heat and time made spoilage inevitable, nothing was wasted. Beer left too long in the sun soured quickly, turning from cloudy froth into something tangy and unpleasant. But instead of throwing it away, Egyptians drank it anyway, sometimes even on purpose. They believed it cleansed the body, cut through illness, or at the very least, filled the stomach when no fresh brew was at hand. You sip again, grimacing, but you understand the practicality. Imagine the long months when grain stores ran low, or when the brewing process went wrong. Would you pour away jars of spoiled beer after spending precious barley to make them? Not likely. You would drink, wince, and tell yourself it was good for you, and perhaps in some strange way it was. The sourness might have provided some antibacterial effects, though that's not why they valued it. To them, it was just another form of beer, another tool for survival. The scene around you grows livelier as people laugh at each other's faces after their first sips. Children stick out their tongues, men slap each other's backs, women shake their heads and drink anyway. It feels less like indulgence and more like resilience. This was not luxury, this was stubbornness. Life gave them sour beer, and they drank it. And then comes the quirky twist. You hear someone mention that sour beer was sometimes used as a base for strange tonics, mixed with herbs or even salt to create medicinal brews. Imagine a healer handing you a cup of vinegary liquid, insisting it would purge the bad humors from your stomach. You'd gag, swallow, and maybe believe you were cleansed. The bitterness was part of the cure, or so they thought. Of course, scholars still debate how common this practice was. Some argue sour drinks were widespread, unavoidable in the heat of Egypt, and so everyone drank them regularly. Others believe they were seen as unpleasant but tolerable only in times of scarcity, the preference always leaning toward fresh beer or sweetened mixtures. The truth remains unclear. Was sour beer embraced as useful or endured as necessity? The jars whisper but never shout, leaving us guessing. You sip again, this time more slowly. And as the sourness burns down your throat, you notice something strange. It sharpens you, clears your head, almost like vinegar does in cooking. It doesn't feel indulgent, but it feels bracing, steadying, a jolt to the senses. Maybe that was its power, not to delight, but to remind you were alive. The courtyard rings with voices now. Some sing, some cough, some laugh as they force the liquid down. It's not elegant, it's not sweet, but it belongs here all the same. Because Egypt wasn't only gold masks and perfumed wine, it was also this. Clay jars of spoiled beer, passed hand to hand, swallowed with a grimace and a shrug. A reminder that survival rarely tastes pleasant, but it still keeps you standing. Your jar is nearly empty, and you drain the last mouthful with a shiver. You set it down, lips puckered, stomach buzzing with sour heat. Another strange Egyptian drink has run through you. Not glamorous, not sacred, but practical, persistent. As much a part of life along the Nile as the floods in the fields. The sour tang of spoiled beer still bites at your throat when the next vessel is set before you, and you know from the first glance this isn't meant to be enjoyed. The jar is plain, utilitarian, and when you peer into it, the liquid inside is cloudy and briny, with a smell that makes you wrinkle your nose. You swirl it once, and the faint foam clings to the sides like salt crust on a shoreline. This isn't a drink born of feasting or comfort. It's a draught handed down by priests, a concoction of salted water meant not to refresh you, but to purge you. You hesitate before sipping, but the priest who offers it gives you no option. His eyes are stern, his shaven head gleams in the lamplight, and the way he tilts the vessel toward you makes refusal feel dangerous. You swallow, and the taste assaults you, sharp, brackish, almost burning with its salt. Your body reacts immediately, your stomach tightening, your throat contracting, as if every instinct knows this is no ordinary drink. You cough, sputter, and the priest nods solemnly. This is exactly the point. Egyptians believed that the body, like the spirit, could be cleansed. Just as rituals purified the soul, salted draughts purified the flesh, sweeping out illness, poison, or corruption. Physicians, those curious blends of healer, priest, and magician, sometimes prescribed saline mixtures to patients, instructing them to drink and purge. The suffering was part of the cure. To drink salted water was to submit to a brutal kind of medicine, one that promised to rid you of what ailed you by sheer force. You imagine an ailing man staggering into a temple, begging for relief from a fever. The priest listens, mixes salt into a vessel of Nile water, and hands it over with instructions to drink it all. The man obeys, choking it down, body convulsing, stomach emptying. Was he healed? Perhaps. Or perhaps he simply endured the ritual, convinced that the violent cleansing meant the sickness had been driven out. Belief, as much as salt, did the work. Around you, the scene grows vivid. Rows of pilgrims kneeling before temple basins, priests handing out small brimming cups, chanting as each one is swallowed. Some drink with trembling devotion, some with visible dread. The air smells of sweat and brine, the silence broken only by the sound of coughing, retching, groaning. And yet through it all runs a thread of reverence, as if the suffering were holy, the discomfort itself an offering to the gods. And here's the curious, almost humorous detail. Sometimes Egyptians added herbs or oils to make the salted drink slightly more bearable. Coriander seeds, mint leaves, even honey drizzled in. Imagine sipping briny water with a hint of sweetness fighting hopelessly against the flood of salt. It's a strange attempt at kindness, a reminder that even when medicine felt like punishment, people still tried to soften its cruelty. But scholars still argue about how common these saline purges really were. Were they an everyday prescription, part of ordinary healing practices? Or were they reserved for rare cases, administered only in temples under priestly authority? Some point to numerous medical papyri that describe purging as a cure, suggesting it was widespread. Others counter that the scarcity of salt in the desert world made it too precious for frequent use, perhaps saved only for ritual cleansing of the elite. The jars themselves, when unearthed, remain silent. The debate lingers, leaving you unsure whether the cup in your hand reflects the suffering of thousands, or the strange faith of only a few. You sip again reluctantly, and the briny liquid coats your tongue like seawater swallowed by accident. Your body shudders, your stomach churns, and you feel the faint nausea creep up. You press the vessel away, setting it down on the sand, but the priest only smiles faintly, satisfied that you've swallowed enough to purge. Your lips sting with salt, your throat burns, and your belly twists as if preparing to expel what it has taken. The courtyard feels quieter now, the torches dimmer, the air heavier with the weight of ritual. Around you, others groan and stagger, clutching their bellies, while priests chant softly, assuring them that the pain is proof of healing. You lean back against the wall, sweat rising on your brow, and realize you've just tasted another Egyptian drink that was less about pleasure than about faith. Not a toast, not a feast, but a challenge. To swallow what hurt in order to believe in what healed. You sit for a long moment, still feeling the salted burn in your throat, when the priest gestures again for you to remain calm. He is not mocking you, nor gloating at your discomfort. To him, this is sacred work. He believes with absolute certainty that the gods themselves move through these salty waters, scouring the impurities from the body, just as the Nile scours its banks each year when it floods. The water carries silt, life and renewal, but it also carries away what is stagnant. The parallel is clear. To purge the body was to mirror the cleansing of the land, to harmonize with the eternal rhythms of nature. You let your head rest against the wall and close your eyes, imagining the floodwaters rising, spilling over fields, washing away debris. In that image, you see yourself too, your stomach aching, your throat raw, but your body somehow lighter for having been emptied. It is a brutal metaphor, yes, but one Egyptians lived by. Life demanded cycles of fullness and emptiness, pain and relief, death and rebirth. Nearby, you hear someone retching, a harsh echo against the stone walls. The priest who administered the draught does not rush to help. Instead, he nods gravely, muttering that the sickness has left the body. You wonder how many ailments were genuinely eased this way. Parasites driven out, toxins flushed, or how many people were left weaker, convinced their suffering was a sign of cure. It's a question that ripples across time, as alive today as it was then. How much of medicine is chemistry, and how much is faith? And then, almost comically, you recall the small detail you overheard earlier, that some of these salted purges were not swallowed at all, but snorted through the nose. A priestly text once instructed patients to inhale salt water to clear the head. You picture an Egyptian kneeling, eyes squeezed shut, pouring brine into his nostrils, spluttering violently while priests insist his spirit is now purged of evil winds. The image nearly makes you laugh, though your own stomach is still too uneasy to enjoy the joke. The debate over this strange practice lingers even in the minds of scholars. Was it truly healing, or was it more symbolic? A dramatic way to show devotion, to prove obedience to ritual authority. Did Egyptians believe the salt itself carried divine essence, or was it merely a tool to shock the body into obedience? The papyri describe the method, but the reasoning behind it remains elusive. Some argue it was proto-scientific, an early recognition that purging sometimes relieved real symptoms. Others suggest it was magic disguised as medicine, a performance of suffering to please gods who demanded sacrifice. You sip another faint mouthful, though now the taste revolts you, and you can feel your body resisting. Your lips are cracked, your stomach tight, your throat sore. And yet, there is something strangely dignified in the act. You are participating in the same ritual countless Egyptians endured, not to delight in flavor, but to believe in cleansing. It is not a drink of joy, but of surrender. The courtyard is hushed now, broken only by groans and the low hum of priestly chants. Torches gutter in the breeze, shadows flicker across painted walls. You clutch your belly, sweat sliding down your temple, and you realize you are not alone in this discomfort. Every face here reflects your own, a mixture of nausea and fragile hope. Together, you are bound not by pleasure, but by the shared endurance of pain in the name of healing. At last, you set the vessel aside, half drained, and the priest does not push you further. He bows slightly, as if acknowledging you've endured enough, and turns to another supplicant. You breathe slowly, letting the brine settle like a storm in your stomach. Your lips are parched, your body aching, but in the emptiness you feel a peculiar clarity. Perhaps this was the real gift, not the drink itself, but the way it forced you to confront your own weakness, to emerge trembling yet somehow renewed. Another strange Egyptian drink has left its mark on you. It is not one you would ever crave again, not one that brings joy or comfort, But it speaks volumes about Egypt, their willingness to turn even suffering into ritual, their belief that the gods hid power in every corner of the natural world, even in something as simple and punishing as salt dissolved in water. You lean back, exhaling, your body weary but your mind awake. You've swallowed Egypt again, this time not in sweetness or froth, but in brine and endurance. And as the torches flicker low, you understand, here, even pain could be made sacred. Even the harshest draught could be called a drink of life. Your lips are still cracked from the briny draught when a woman sets down a new vessel beside you. This one sealed with wax and smelling faintly of sweetness even before it's opened. The jar is heavier than you expect, sticky around the rim, as though honey has dripped down the sides and hardened in the sun. When the stopper is pulled free, the fragrance unfurls into the night air, rich, golden, tinged with fruit. You lean in and realize this isn't just honey water nor plain date wine. This is something stranger and more indulgent. A hybrid of fruit and honey, left to ferment until it becomes a heady mead-like drink, thick with sweetness and power. You take a sip, and the liquid slides across your tongue like silk, far smoother than gruel, far brighter than beer. The figs bring a mellow depth, the dates a syrupy punch, and the honey ties it all together with a glowing warmth. But it isn't just sweet, beneath it lurks a quiet bite, the bubbling sharpness of fermentation. It blooms in your chest, spreading warmth into your veins, the kind of heat that makes your limbs loosen and your eyelids grow heavy. You swallow again, and it feels as though you've just tasted liquid sunlight, condensed into a jar. Honey was precious in Egypt, guarded and harvested with reverence. Figs and dates were abundant, eaten fresh or dried, used in stews, breads and offerings. To blend them all together was both luxury and ingenuity. This drink could appear at feasts, offered to nobles reclining on carved couches, or in temples, poured before statues as libations fit for the gods themselves. But it could just as easily appear in smaller gatherings, crafted by families who wanted something stronger than plain beer, sweeter than ordinary wine. You can almost see jars of this hybrid tucked away in shaded corners of homes, bubbling quietly while children sniff the air curiously, waiting for the day it would be ready. The night around you grows louder as more cups are poured. Men laugh more freely, women's cheeks glow with warmth, and music swells, the rhythm of drums beating faster. This is no purging draught. This is a drink that invites joy, loosens tongues, and pulls people into celebration. The sweetness hides the strength until it's too late, and you suspect more than one dancer will collapse before dawn. And here's the curious twist. Sometimes Egyptians added spices to these honey fruit hybrids. Cinnamon brought from trade routes, or local herbs like fenugreek. Imagine the clash of flavors, sweet and sharp, layered into a drink that already blurred boundaries. Some jars may have tasted exquisite, others disastrous, but each one would have been unique, shaped by the hand that brewed it. It makes you wonder if people secretly prided themselves on their own recipes, boasting that their household brew was sweeter, stronger, or more healing than the neighbors. But even here, in the golden glow of sweetness, the debate lingers. Scholars still argue whether these honey fruit ferments were common among the general population, or largely limited to ritual and elite banquets. The residues in jars suggest they were real enough, but how often did Egyptians drink them? Was it a seasonal luxury, tied to harvest festivals when figs and dates were abundant? Or was it something more consistent? A hidden tradition running quietly through villages and towns. The truth slips through your fingers like honey itself, sticky, irresistible, but impossible to pin down cleanly. You take another sip, and the warmth blossoms further, creeping into your cheeks. The sweetness no longer overwhelms. It steadies, weaving itself into your body like a lullaby. Around you, the laughter grows louder, music faster, the air heavier with the scent of honey and fruit. This is indulgence, yes, but it's also community. You drink, they drink, and together you all lean into the sweetness of forgetting, just for a little while. The sweetness still clings to your lips when another round of jars makes its way through the crowd, and you notice the difference immediately. Some are lighter, nearly golden in color, others darker, almost like molasses. You take a cautious sip from the darker batch, and it coats your tongue with an intensity that nearly overwhelms you. The honey is deeper, almost smoky, the figs sharper, the fermentation more pronounced. You realize no two jars taste alike. This was not a standardized recipe. It was experimentation, improvisation, trial and error turned into tradition. You picture households across Egypt brewing their own versions, each shaped by what fruit was available, how long it was left to bubble, how much honey they could afford to spare. A wealthy family might craft a refined version, straining it carefully and storing it in polished vessels for festivals. A farmer's family might toss figs and dates into a jar with leftover honey, cover it with a cloth, and hope the gods favored the batch. Each brew told its own story, and you're drinking them now, one after another, the differences written across your tongue. And the symbolism runs deeper than flavor. Honey was sacred, associated with the sun god Ra, considered incorruptible, eternal. Figs were tied to fertility, their abundance echoing life's renewal. Dates symbolized sweetness and strength, harvested from palms that stood as emblems of resilience. To drink them together was to fold Egypt's symbols into your very body, to taste not just food, but faith, hope, and identity. You swallow again, and for a moment, you feel you are not only drinking, but participating in a ritual of life itself. Yet you also know the risks. This kind of brew, sweet and bubbling, could ferment too long, turn too sharp, grow too strong. You imagine a group of friends laughing around a jar one evening, only to find themselves staggering, speech slurred, collapsing in heaps before the night is done. The very thing that made the drink inviting, the sweetness, also made it dangerous. You almost laugh at the thought. Egypt's most elegant disasters might have begun with nothing more than a jar of honey and figs left too long in the heat. The quirky detail comes to you as you sip again. Some of these honey fruit hybrids were offered not to people but to the gods. Priests poured them before statues, left them in tombs, believing the sweetness would please divine palates. Imagine leaving a jar of bubbling, sticky liquid for eternity, convinced it would travel with the dead into the afterlife. The gods, it seemed, had a sweet tooth, as much as mortals did. And of course, scholars remain divided. Some believe these brews were simply luxuries, occasional indulgences never meant for the common man. Others argue they were more widespread, an everyday practice for households who had fruit and honey to spare. Archaeological evidence shows residues, yes, but context is slippery. Were they remnants of noble banquets or peasant suppers? The arguments rage quietly in academic halls. But here in this courtyard, sipping from your jar, the answer feels almost irrelevant. People brewed it, people drank it, and it mattered because it made life sweeter, even for a night. You tilt your head back and drain the last of the golden liquid, your lips sticky, your throat warm, your body humming with its strength. Around you, the courtyard blurs with laughter and song. Children chase each other between clusters of adults. Musicians play faster, dancers spin. The air is thick with the perfume of honey and fermenting fruit, cloying but irresistible. You lean back, eyes half closed, and realize you've just swallowed Egypt's closest thing to liquid joy. It is indulgent, it is fleeting, and it is utterly human. Another strange drink, another piece of Egypt, another sip of eternity caught in a jar of sweetness and light. Your mouth is still sticky with honey when a clay bowl is pressed into your hands, its surface warm from the day's sun. You lean in and your eyes water before you even taste it. The smell is sharp, biting, unmistakable. Someone has steeped onions into water and left the pungent mixture to mellow, or perhaps intensify, depending on your courage. You hesitate, but the expectant faces around you leave no room for escape. You take a sip, and the liquid stings your throat like fire. The taste is raw, sulfurous, and clings to your tongue in a way that feels both medicinal and cruel. This is no banquet treat. This is a remedy, an Egyptian tonic brewed with onions, believed to strengthen the weak and revive the weary. Onions were everywhere in Egypt. Farmers pulled them from the rich soil left behind by the Nile floods. Bunches of green stalks drying in courtyards, bulbs stacked in baskets. They weren't just food. They were medicine, offerings, even symbols of eternity. Layers upon layers wrapping the core made them emblems of life unending, and they were tucked into tombs as provisions for the afterlife. You sip again, wincing, and realize this onion brew was more than a farmer's trick. It was a sip of something sacred, wrapped in the belief that what burned the tongue could heal the body. The courtyard smells sharper now, as others drink beside you. Some gulp quickly, grimacing. Others sip slowly, muttering prayers. A child whimpers after tasting, and is soothed with promises that strength will come. You watch, fascinated, as families hand the tonic to the old, the sick, even the young, believing onions could drive illness from their bodies. For them, the burn was proof of its power. If it hurt going down, it must be chasing away the evil spirits within. And here's the quirky little twist. You hear someone nearby boast that onion drinks could even ward off curses. Imagine swallowing a brew, not just to ease your cough, but to protect yourself from a neighbor's ill will. A foul taste for foul intentions, traded in the form of liquid fire. You picture a man downing his onion tonic before confronting a rival, reeking of sulfur, but confident that no hex could touch him. But scholars still debate how medicinal this really was. Did onion drinks genuinely heal? Or were they more symbolic, prescribed because people believed in their power rather than any true effect? Some argue that onions contain natural compounds that may have had mild benefits for the immune system. Others insist the practice was ritual more than science, an act of faith wrapped in layers of pungency. The debate echoes through modern studies, where chemical analyses meet ancient texts, and neither fully silences the other. You take another sip, your eyes watering, your lips burning. The taste is overwhelming, yet there's an odd satisfaction in it. Your chest feels warmer, your stomach steadier. Perhaps it is only suggestion, but you sense why Egyptians valued it so. In a land of harsh climate and frequent illness, anything that made the body feel stronger was worth enduring. The night air seems sharper too, as though the onion's fumes are rising into the very sky. People cough, laugh, clutch their bellies, and still they drink. This is no feast drink, no festival indulgence. It is survival, belief, and resilience distilled into a foul-tasting liquid. You set your bowl down, throat still burning, eyes stinging, but your body humming faintly with its afterglow. The burn of onion still clings to your lips, and the air around you feels saturated with its sting, as if the entire courtyard has been transformed into a giant kitchen. Someone passes by carrying more bowls, and the acrid scent follows like a trail of smoke. You notice that no one is shy about drinking this brew. Even those who grimace still reach for it, almost proudly. It is not indulgence they're after. It is toughness, the same way you might show bravery by enduring a harsh trial. To swallow onions was to prove resilience, to prove that your body could take punishment and still stand. You tilt the bowl again, sip once more, and your body reacts instantly. A rush of heat surges through your chest, your nose tingles, and your eyes water until the torchlight around you blurs. Yet oddly enough, the rawness sharpens your thoughts. Your fatigue from the earlier drinks eases, replaced with a strange alertness. Perhaps that was its real secret. Not that it cured illness in any modern sense, but that it shocked the body awake, like plunging into cold water. Egyptians may not have described it in those words, but they knew the feeling, and they chased it. You think of the laborers who built temples, the farmers who bent for hours under the sun, the soldiers who marched across desert sand. Onion tonics may have been their crude form of energy drink, a sip before the day's toil, a sip when exhaustion pressed too hard. In papyri, healers listed onions again and again as remedies for everything from stomach pain to headaches. To drink them was to believe in their universal power. You can almost imagine overseers handing bowls to weary workers, insisting they swallow to keep their strength. The quirky detail lingers in your mind. The idea that onion tonics weren't just for the living. They were sometimes placed in tombs as provisions for the dead, so the spirit could drink strength in the afterlife. You picture jars of pungent onion liquid sealed in cool darkness, waiting for a soul to awaken, the smell still rising faintly even after centuries. It's almost funny, the thought of eternity itself perfumed with onions. Yet, as with so many of Egypt's drinks, scholars debate whether these tonics were truly widespread, or mostly confined to ritual and healing houses. Were ordinary villagers brewing onion water daily, or was it mainly priests and physicians who prescribed it? Some argue its abundance in medical texts proves it was common knowledge. Others counter that its place in tombs and offerings shows it carried symbolic weight beyond daily life. The truth might be both, that onion drinks were part of ordinary kitchens and extraordinary rituals alike. You finish the last of your bowl, forcing down the liquid even as your tongue begs you to stop. The aftertaste lingers fiercely, clinging to the back of your throat like smoke that won't disperse. Around you, people's faces glow red, their eyes watering, their laughter breaking into coughs. It is a scene that would almost be comedic if not for the gravity with which it's done. They aren't drinking for fun. They're drinking because they believe strength comes from fire, that healing is born from endurance. The torches flicker, the air thick with the sulphurous haze of onions, and you lean back, chest burning but strangely invigorated. You've tasted another of Egypt's strange brews. Not sweet, not intoxicating, not pleasant by any stretch, but But in its sharpness lies a glimpse of the Egyptian spirit itself. Practical, resilient, convinced that even the harshest of flavors could hold the power of life. The onion sting still clouds your senses when a new vessel is brought forward, this one taller than the others, its surface etched with faint designs of reeds and birds. The seal is broken, and a rush of aroma fills the air, not acrid this time, but smoky, resinous, almost like incense bottled into liquid form. You lean in, and the sharpness pricks your nose in a way that is both unsettling and alluring. When the cup is tipped toward your lips, the flavor confirms it. This is no simple beer, no sweet honey blend. This is beer steeped with resin, perhaps pine or terebinth, one of Egypt's stranger experiments in preserving and flavoring their most beloved drink. The taste is dry, bitter, and leaves a faint coating on your tongue, as though you've licked the inside of a wooden chest. Yet it carries a peculiar warmth, a depth that makes you sip again in spite of yourself. The bitterness doesn't vanish, but it transforms into something steadier, like the lingering taste of smoke after a fire. You imagine Egyptians deliberately stirring chunks of resin into vats of fermenting barley, not to make it palatable in the way honey did, but to give it strength, longevity, and perhaps a touch of mystery. Beer, after all, was not just food in Egypt, it was life itself. And life demanded variety. Resin had preservative qualities, able to slow spoilage, which in the hot Nile climate must have been a constant struggle. By adding resin, brewers may have hoped to extend the life of their beer, giving it weeks of drinkability instead of mere days. But there's more to it than practicality. To sip resin-infused beer was to swallow something exotic, something that smelled like temple halls and sacred fires, a taste that blurred lines between feast and ritual. The courtyard grows heady with the scent as more jars are opened. The air feels heavier, as though you've wandered into a shrine rather than a gathering. People sip more slowly, their faces contemplative, some murmuring about its strength, others complaining of its harshness. A man beside you laughs, saying it tastes like chewing a cedar beam, while another swears it clears his chest and brightens his vision. You chuckle under your breath, knowing both might be true in their own ways. And here's the curious twist. You hear whispers that resin beer was sometimes prescribed for stomach troubles, believed to bind the insides and drive away illness. Imagine being told to drink what feels like liquefied incense to settle your gut. Whether it helped or not, the symbolism was undeniable. Incense carried prayers upward. Perhaps in liquid form it carried healing inward. Yet scholars remain divided on how common this practice was. Was resin beer a widespread taste, or was it rare, reserved for temples and elites? Some archaeological residues show traces of resins in jars, proof that the practice existed. But whether this was a staple variation or an occasional experiment is still debated. Some say it was a specialty brew, produced in small batches for ritual feasts. Others argue it might have been more practical, a way for everyday brewers to stretch the life of their beer. The truth lies hidden in broken jars, their sticky remnants whispering half-secrets. You sip again, this time less reluctantly, and the bitterness feels almost familiar, like coffee might to your modern tongue. It's not pleasant, but it has a strange gravity, drawing you back for another taste. The warmth spreads into your chest, steadier than the onion fire, calmer than the sour beer. You exhale slowly, and the air carries the faint scent of pine back into your nostrils, doubling the sensation. The people around you begin to sing softly, voices weaving with the smoky taste, as if the resin itself pulls them into something solemn. The torches flicker, their smoke mingling with the resin scent until you cannot tell which comes from fire and which from cup. You drink again, and it feels less like a beverage and more like a ritual disguised as one. A draught meant not only to fill your belly, but to link you, however faintly, to something sacred. The resin flavor still clings to your tongue as though it has coated every corner of your mouth, and yet strangely you no longer recoil. What first struck you as harsh now settles into something oddly steadying, as if your body is adjusting to the bitterness. You sip again, slower this time, letting it linger, and you begin to understand why some Egyptians might have embraced this brew despite its pungency. It wasn't a drink of indulgence, it was a drink of endurance, one that grew on you with time, much like the desert itself. You glance around and notice that not everyone is treating it the same way. A few swallow quickly, trying to mask their grimaces with laughter. Others cradle their cups with reverence, eyes closed, as if savoring each drop as part of a private meditation. The contrast fascinates you. how the same brew can be punishment for one and poetry for another. Perhaps that is the very essence of Egypt's strange drinks. They walk the line between necessity and ritual, survival and transcendence. The scene sharpens in your mind. Temple courtyards thick with incense, priests carrying censers that trail smoke through the air, and beside them jars of resin beer offered to the gods. You imagine the connection was deliberate. Drink what the gods inhale, share their essence, blur the boundary between human and divine. Every sip might have felt like breathing in the sacred fires themselves, a way to anchor the spirit while nourishing the flesh. The quirky little detail returns to you as someone nearby jokes that resin beer is so sticky it could glue a jar shut. You laugh under your breath, because when you glance at the rim of your own vessel, you see hardened streaks clinging like amber. It's not far from the truth. Imagine servants scrubbing hopelessly at jars, cursing brewers who thought resin was a good idea. The practicality of preserving beer may have come at the expense of endless sticky cleanup. Yet scholars still debate the true intent behind it all. Was resin meant primarily as preservative, a practical answer to spoilage? Or was it an intentional flavoring, something Egyptians sought out for its distinct taste? The arguments circle endlessly, fueled by traces of tar-like residue found in ancient vessels. Some researchers point to parallels in other cultures where resins flavored wine, suggesting Egypt was part of a broader Mediterranean practice. Others insist Egypt's resin use was uniquely pragmatic, born of necessity in a hot climate. The evidence refuses to choose sides, leaving you to sip in uncertainty. You drain another mouthful, and the bitterness swells, but so does a kind of clarity. The resin has scoured your palate clean of honey, onions, and sour beer. It leaves you bare, unadorned, awake. Around you, the songs grow deeper, voices rising in unison. The resin taste seems to echo in their chants, low and rough, like the flavor itself has seeped into their throats. By the time your vessel empties, you feel heavy but grounded, as if the drink has pressed you into the very earth. You set it down, resin streaks glistening on the rim, and wipe your lips with the back of your hand. It may not have been sweet, it may not have been gentle, but it has shown you another face of Egypt, resourceful, unafraid to mingle the sacred with the everyday, unafraid to turn even tree sap into something to swallow, to believe in, to endure. The torches gutter low, smoke hanging in the air, and for a moment you feel as if the line between incense and drink has blurred completely. You've tasted Egypt again, not in delight this time, but in determination, in the smoky persistence of a people who found sustenance even in the bitterness of resin. The resin bitterness still hums in your chest when a different sort of vessel is placed before you, smaller, lighter, and faintly sticky along the rim. You tilt it and catch a scent that makes your eyebrows rise. Sweet, grassy, almost fruity, but with a smoky undercurrent. You bring it closer, and only then do you realize this is milk, but not as you know it. It's been fermented, soured, perhaps flavored with herbs or even smoke, turned into a tangy drink that Egyptians believed had both nourishing and healing powers. The first sip makes you pause. It's tart, thicker than water, but thinner than gruel, with a faint fizz that tickles your tongue. The aftertaste is sharp, almost lemon-like, though you know lemons won't arrive in Egypt for centuries yet. The sourness is the result of milk left to ferment in clay jars, transforming what would quickly spoil in the desert heat into something that could last longer, something drinkable. You swallow again, and the tang spreads down your throat, leaving your stomach warm, but your mind curious. This is not beer, not wine, not a tonic of onions or brine. This is milk made strange, a drink halfway between survival and experimentation. Cattle and goats were part of Egyptian life, their images painted in tombs, their bodies tethered in fields. Milk itself, fresh and unfermented, was consumed, though rarely. It spoiled too quickly, too precious to waste. But when left in jars, milk transformed, curdling, fermenting, taking on flavors that were at once off-putting and intriguing. Egyptians didn't shy away from such transformations. They believed sour milk could soothe the stomach, cool fevers, or strengthen the weak. In papyri, remedies appear that mix fermented milk with herbs, oils, even honey. To drink it was to trust in the strange alchemy of time and clay. Around you, the courtyard shifts again. Children wrinkle their noses as they sip, while elders nod approvingly. Women stir jars carefully, skimming off curds for food and ladling the liquid into smaller bowls. A priest explains to a pilgrim that this drink cools the body, makes it light, clears the spirit of heat and corruption. You glance around and notice how casually it's being consumed, not like wine, reserved for elites, nor like beer, tied to daily rations. This feels somewhere in between, medicinal, occasional, yet strangely ordinary. And here's the quirky twist. You overhear that fermented milk was sometimes smoked, the jars sealed with smouldering herbs to give it a strange, almost savory taste. Imagine sipping a drink that tastes like both yogurt and campfire at once. To some it must have been foul, to others divine. Egyptians were not afraid to push the boundaries of flavor if they believed health or strength lay at the bottom of the cup. But scholars still argue whether milk drinks were truly common in Egypt. Tomb paintings show cattle being milked, yes, but was the liquid drunk regularly? Or was it mostly used for cheese, cooking, or ritual offerings? Some argue fermented milk was rare, a healer's tool or a traveler's trick to make milk last longer. Others believe it was fairly widespread, though uncelebrated, too ordinary to warrant frequent mention in texts. The evidence is thin, the debate ongoing, leaving the truth as cloudy as the drink in your bowl. You sip again, this time holding it longer in your mouth. The tang feels less shocking now, almost refreshing. It cuts through the heaviness of gruel, the bitterness of resin, even the burn of onions. It settles in your belly like a strange anchor, sour but sturdy. Around you, people drink with calm, some smiling faintly, some frowning, but none refusing. It is not indulgence. It is not punishment. It is something else entirely. A reminder that even in a land of gods and gold, survival demanded creativity. The sour tang lingers on your lips, and though it makes you wince at first, the taste is oddly grounding. You can feel your body adjusting, almost as though the milk is settling the chaos left behind by onion tonics and briny purges. Around you, others seem to feel the same. A young boy, after grimacing dramatically through his first sip, ends up licking the rim of his bowl, as if testing whether he really disliked it. An old man nearby swirls his cup thoughtfully, muttering that the gods put strange gifts in even the most ordinary jars. You take another sip, and the smokiness comes through more strongly this time. The rumor you overheard about smoking fermented milk suddenly makes sense. The faint campfire note creeps across your tongue, weaving itself into the sourness. It's peculiar, but it works in its own way. You imagine Egyptians crouched around hearths, setting jars near embers, letting herbs curl smoke into the liquid, believing it would give strength or chase away sickness. In this moment, you realize they weren't just surviving, they were experimenting, testing what clay, fire, and time could create. The courtyard becomes alive with conversation. Some laugh at the oddity of the drink, while others nod solemnly about its healing power. Priests talk of balance, of how sourness cools the heat of fevers, how smoke drives out bad spirits. The act of drinking feels less like nourishment and more like a ritual of equilibrium, swallowing something unpleasant to restore harmony. You tilt your head back for another mouthful, and for a fleeting second, you almost believe it. The quirky image of tomb offerings rises in your mind. Jars of fermented milk sealed carefully and placed beside bread, beer and meat, meant to accompany the dead into eternity. Imagine the afterlife stocked not only with golden wine and honeyed beer, but also with cloudy bowls of sour milk. To us it feels strange, even comic. But to the Egyptians, it was another form of provision, proof that they valued its sustaining power enough to carry it into forever. Yet scholars remain uncertain. Was fermented milk really central to Egyptian diet and ritual? Or is its presence in medical texts and tombs exaggerated? Some argue that its scarcity in artistic depictions suggests it wasn't celebrated, more a humble staple than a prized drink. Others counter that its humble nature is exactly why it appears less in art. It was too ordinary to boast about, but essential enough to persist quietly through daily life. As with so many Egyptian drinks, the debate swirls endlessly, like sour curds in cloudy liquid. Your bowl empties at last, and you feel the sourness settle into your body like a low hum. It doesn't intoxicate, it doesn't dazzle, but it steadies you. You glance around and see the same calm on others' faces. The priests move among them, refilling bowls, murmuring blessings. The torches flicker, smoke mingling with the faint tang of milk, and you lean back, letting the strangeness of it all wash over you. It's not a drink you would crave again, not one you would toast with or savor, but in its sour, smoky way, it carries the essence of Egypt. The resourcefulness to turn spoilage into sustenance, the faith to see medicine in strangeness, the determination to swallow what was available and call it life. The sourness of milk still prickles at your throat when a boy shuffles forward carrying a jar that looks different from all the others you've seen tonight. It is smaller, more delicately painted, its stopper bound with twine and sealed in wax. The priest who accepts it lifts it with reverence, mutters a prayer, and then breaks the seal. A thick, heady aroma escapes, sweet, cloying, but layered with something unfamiliar. When your cup is filled, you raise it to your lips and catch the unmistakable perfume of pomegranates. The liquid gleams deep red in the torchlight, richer than wine, heavier than juice. You sip, and the taste rushes over you. Sweet at first, then sour, then bitter in the back of your throat. It's not simple like grape wine, nor light like herbal teas. It's more complicated, as though someone bottled every shade of flavor in a single fruit. You swallow, and the richness seems to linger, staining your tongue, warming your chest. This is pomegranate wine, one of Egypt's more exotic inventions, equal parts feast and medicine. The pomegranate tree was not as common as date palms or figs, but it carried immense weight in Egyptian culture. Its fruit, bursting with seeds, was a symbol of fertility, abundance, even eternal life. To crush those seeds into a drink was to distill not only flavor but meaning. The Egyptians believed pomegranate wine could cool fevers, strengthen the heart, even aid women in matters of fertility. You imagine jars of it lining temple shelves, each one glowing red in the lamplight like jars of captured blood, both feared and revered. Around you, the atmosphere shifts. This is no everyday beer, no worker's gruel. People sip more slowly, more deliberately, as though savoring not just taste but symbolism. A mother presses a cup to her lips, then to her child's, whispering blessings with each swallow. A priest tips a jar before a statue, crimson liquid spilling like an offering of lifeblood. You watch, transfixed, as the courtyard seems to glow faintly with the red shimmer of the drink itself. And then comes the quirky twist. You hear someone joke that pomegranate wine stains worse than anything else. Imagine Egyptians waking the next morning with red lips, red teeth, and red fingers, all marked by their indulgence. It must have made feasts a messy affair. Laughter stained crimson, clothes marked forever with splotches. Yet perhaps they embraced it, proud to wear the color of abundance, of fertility, of life itself. But scholars still argue whether pomegranate wine was truly common or more symbolic than practical. Archaeological finds have uncovered residues in jars, traces of tart compounds suggesting fermentation. Some historians argue it was widely drunk in households, a variation on grape wine or beer. Others insist it was more ceremonial, a drink tied to fertility rites and temple offerings rather than daily life. The debate lingers, much like the taste now lingering stubbornly on your tongue, impossible to wash away. You sip again, slower this time, and the flavors unfold like layers. Sweet, sour, bitter, earthy. It feels alive in a way that other drinks didn't. It feels deliberate, crafted, weighted with meaning. And as you watch the crimson liquid catch the firelight, you realize it wasn't just a drink to Egyptians. It was a reminder of cycles. Life, death, rebirth. Written in seeds and sealed in jars. The red sheen still glows in your cup as you lift it again. And the richness of the drink coats your mouth in a way that feels almost indulgent. Around you, the torches flicker against painted walls, their light dancing across the liquid like embers in a hearth. The pomegranate wine doesn't intoxicate in the same blunt fashion as beer or date brews. Instead, it creeps slowly, curling through your body with a warmth that feels deeper, more deliberate. You imagine this was part of its appeal, not just to make people stumble and laugh, but to make them feel infused with vitality, with some essence of the fruit itself. The crowd reflects that feeling. Men lean closer in conversation, women smile more softly. Children watch wide-eyed as their elders sip with deliberate reverence. The drink stain spreads visibly, lips turned crimson, fingertips darkened, even the rims of jars glowing faintly as if they had absorbed the fruit's life. You realize that drinking pomegranate wine was not just taste or sustenance. It was spectacle, a sensory reminder of fertility and power that anyone could see. And you remember the odd little detail whispered in papyri. Some believed that pomegranate juice could expel parasites from the body, cleansing the gut of hidden invaders. Imagine swallowing the sour, bitter sting not only as indulgence, but as cure, believing that each sip was driving illness out of your belly. It must have made the bitterness easier to endure, turning what might have seemed harsh into proof of its power. The scholarly debates press in at this point. Was pomegranate wine truly common in Egypt? Or does the symbolism of the fruit make us overstate its role? The seeds appear in art, the fruit is painted in tombs, residues linger in jars. But how much of that was everyday practice, and how much was ritual? Some argue it was brewed often, a staple in noble households. Others counter that its rarity and symbolic value made it more a luxury, an occasional treasure rather than a daily drink. The truth hovers between both possibilities, as elusive as the balance of sweetness and sourness in your mouth. You tip back the cup and drain the last swallow, the liquid burning slightly as it slides down your throat. Your lips are stained now, and when you wipe them with your sleeve, a smear of red streaks across the fabric. You laugh quietly, realizing you too carry the mark of this drink. Perhaps that was part of its charm. No one could drink pomegranate wine in secret. Its evidence lingered on your face, on your clothes, on your very body, as though declaring, "I have tasted life." The courtyard quiets for a moment as people lift their crimson cups together. The red liquid glimmers in the firelight, looking for all the world like bowls of blood raised in unison. And yet the mood is not somber but hopeful, celebratory. The Egyptians didn't see blood only as death. They saw it as life, as continuity, as the seed of future generations. By drinking this, they were not flirting with death. They were affirming life. You lean back, lips still sticky, stomach warm, mind humming faintly with the weight of seeds and symbolism. It is not your favorite drink tonight, but it may be the most memorable, the one that binds you most tightly to Egypt's vision of fertility and eternity. Another strange drink, another sip of their world, another step deeper into the endless flow of life along the Nile. Your lips are still stained red from the pomegranate wine when another vessel is brought to you, though this one is wider, flatter, and strangely heavy. The priest who hands it over tilts his head as if to warn you, though he says nothing. You peer inside and see a pale liquid that looks harmless enough, but the smell is sharp, biting, and unmistakable. Vinegar. Not just spoiled wine left too long in the sun, but vinegar deliberately brewed, stored, and used in ways that stretch far beyond taste. You take a cautious sip, and the tang hits you like a slap. Acidic, sour, searing down your throat until your eyes water. You cough, wiping your lips, but the crowd doesn't laugh. Instead, they nod knowingly, as though they've all endured the same burn. Vinegar wasn't just tolerated in Egypt, it was harnessed. Mixed with water, it became a cooling draft on scorching days. Combined with herbs, it turned into a tonic, a purifier, a medicine. You swallow again, bracing yourself. And though the sourness makes you wince, you sense why they drank it. In the relentless heat of the Nile Valley, vinegar's sharp bite must have felt like a strange kind of relief. The courtyard air shifts as more jars are opened, the tang of vinegar mingling with smoke and sweat. Some pour it straight, others dilute it with water, creating a drink that feels less punishing but still bracing. You imagine soldiers marching under the sun, handed skins of water cut with vinegar to keep them going. It doesn't taste pleasant, but it refreshes in its own fierce way, jolting the body awake, cooling the mouth even as it burns. And here comes the quirky twist. You overhear a woman explain that vinegar was sometimes used not only for drinking, but for washing, as a kind of antiseptic. Imagine sipping half a bowl, then pouring the rest over a wound, trusting the same sour sting to heal inside and out. Egyptians blurred those lines often, and vinegar sat at that boundary, both beverage and medicine, both punishment and cure. Yet scholars still argue about how widespread vinegar drinking truly was. Was it a daily practice, like beer, or more occasional, tied to medicine and ritual? Some evidence suggests jars of vinegar-like residues were stored deliberately, indicating planned use. Others argue it was simply the byproduct of spoiled wine, tolerated in desperation but never loved. The debate continues, as sour and unyielding as the taste itself, each sip carrying both necessity and doubt. You take another gulp, forcing it down, and the sharpness clears your sinuses. Wakes your senses, makes your skin prickle. It is not pleasant, but it is undeniable. Around you, others drink the same way, faces puckered, eyes watering, but still swallowing. Because in Egypt nothing was wasted. Even spoilage could be turned into sustenance, even bitterness into survival. The torches hiss softly as the night grows cooler, but the vinegar's sting keeps you alert, your body tingling with its harsh embrace. You set the bowl down, lips burning, stomach buzzing, and you realize you've just tasted another of Egypt's strange brews, one born not of joy, but of endurance, a draught that turned failure into function. The sour bite still lingers in your mouth, so sharp that even the night air seems flavored by it. You watch as others around you sip with the same grim determination, and you realize this isn't about enjoyment. It's about utility, about making the best of what time and heat have spoiled. A man leans back, exhaling loudly after draining his cup, and mutters that vinegar puts iron in his blood. Another woman nods, swearing it cools her body in the heat. Whether true or not, belief gives the drink power. You lift your bowl again, hesitating before taking another swallow. This time you let it sit in your mouth a little longer, tasting beyond the sourness. Underneath, there's a faint sweetness, the ghost of the wine it once was, twisted now into something harsher. You realize that vinegar is a memory of pleasure turned into necessity, a reminder that even luxury, if left long enough, becomes survival food. Egyptians understood that transformation intimately. They didn't discard what changed. They adapted, reshaped, found new uses. The quirky image flashes in your mind. Vinegar mixed with water and carried in skins by workers at the pyramids, passed around like modern sports drinks, the sour sting hydrating them as they hauled limestone under the sun. Each sip a grimace, but also a lifeline. You can almost hear the groans and laughter, men daring each other to gulp it faster, children chasing drops that spill down the sides. It is at once harsh and communal, a drink that binds people through its very unpleasantness. And yet, in the silence of study, scholars still cannot decide how central it truly was. Was vinegar a staple in daily life, or only a fallback when better drinks failed? Was it celebrated for its cooling bite, or endured reluctantly with a shrug? The jars we find whisper only fragments, sour residues, traces of fermentation gone too far. From these, historians argue, drawing pictures of thirsty workers and stern priests, each certain their version is right. The truth may lie somewhere in between. Vinegar as both accident and intention, necessity and invention. You drain the last of your bowl, and the liquid burns all the way down, settling in your stomach like a spark. It doesn't intoxicate, doesn't soothe, but it clears you, sharpens you, makes you feel alive in a way sweetness never could. Around you, others wipe their mouths, eyes watering, lips puckered, and still they nod with grim satisfaction. It is not a drink of joy, but of resilience. The torches flicker, and the courtyard feels quieter now, the air heavy with sourness and smoke. You lean back, bowl empty, lips tingling, stomach buzzing with acid heat. Another strange drink has passed through you, one that embodies Egypt's stubborn spirit, their refusal to waste, their ability to transform even spoilage into survival. The sting of vinegar still haunts your tongue when a new vessel is set before you. This one more curious than any you've seen tonight. It's smaller, squat, with a lid that has been tied down with palm fiber rope. The priest who delivers it does so with a certain flourish, as though unveiling something rare. When the seal is lifted, a wave of fragrance rushes out. Not sour this time, not smoky, but sweet and almost perfumed. You lean closer and catch the unmistakable scent of dates, yet stronger, richer, more intoxicating. You take your first sip, and immediately you know this isn't ordinary date wine. It's thicker, sweeter, more potent. The dates have been boiled, concentrated, then left to ferment into something halfway between a syrup and a liquor. The taste clings to your tongue like caramel, with a hidden burn that blooms only after you swallow. Your stomach warms quickly, almost too quickly, and you realize this drink was not crafted for thirst or even for medicine. It was crafted to overwhelm, to intoxicate, to push the body past its usual boundaries. Dates were the fruit of Egypt, abundant, dependable, and versatile. They were eaten fresh, dried into chewy sweetness, pressed into cakes, or turned into syrup. But here their potential is taken further, transformed into a drink that seems less like food and more like alchemy. The sweetness masks the strength at first, but after a few gulps your head begins to hum, your body relaxes, and your lips curl into a faint smile you didn't mean to make. You sip again, and it feels like the desert sun itself has been poured into your veins. The courtyard changes around you. Laughter grows louder, movements looser. People recline against walls or lie back on mats, cups still in hand, grins wide across their faces. Someone starts clapping to a rhythm, Others join, and soon a rough song rises into the night air. The date liquor has taken hold, not gradually, but suddenly, like a wave breaking all at once. This isn't the gentle haze of beer or the dreamy drift of lotus wine. This is sharper, faster, almost dangerous in its intensity. And here's the quirky twist. You hear a man boast that date liquor can even revive the dead, or at least make the weary dance as if they were reborn. The crowd roars with laughter, and yet part of you wonders if that belief lingered in their rituals. Dates were, after all, tied to fertility and rebirth. To drink their most potent form might have felt like swallowing vitality itself, a jolt of new life coursing through the body. But, as always, scholars debate. Was this potent date liquor a common indulgence, or was it rare, reserved for festivals, perhaps even taboo in some settings? Some argue that residues in jars prove strong date drinks were brewed regularly. Others counter that the concentration required so many fruits that it must have been a luxury, unsustainable for daily use. The truth hides somewhere between practicality and excess, like the burn now threading through your chest. You take another sip, and the sweetness feels heavier, almost cloying, but the warmth it delivers is irresistible. Around you, the courtyard pulses with energy, songs, laughter, dancing feet striking the earth. This is no quiet ritual. This is release, abandon, the kind of drink that strips restraint away. You watch fascinated as Egypt lets itself unravel, not in solemnity, not in worship, but in sheer, intoxicated joy. The sweetness clings stubbornly to your tongue as you lift the cup again, and by now the burn feels less like an intruder and more like a companion. You swallow, and the warmth spreads so quickly it almost startles you. Around you, the atmosphere has transformed. What was once a solemn courtyard of priests and pilgrims now resembles a festival ground. People sway, laugh, clap, and spill their cups without caring. The strong date liquor has unfastened their dignity, and in its place has bloomed a strange, wild joy. You can almost picture a harvest celebration along the Nile, baskets of dates piled high, women crushing them into pulp, men boiling them down into syrup, and jars set aside to ferment. The air heavy with sweetness, buzzing with bees drawn to the sticky residue, children darting about with juice-stained hands, while elders mutter blessings over the bubbling vats. The final product would have been more than a drink. It would have been an event, a marker of plenty, a signal that the land had given generously once again. And then comes the small but curious detail. You overhear someone say that a jar of strong date liquor was sometimes left as an offering in tombs, alongside bread and beer. Imagine a soul waking in the afterlife, reaching not just for nourishment, but for a drink strong enough to shake off death itself. The thought almost makes you laugh, though part of you feels the weight of its symbolism. Dates as vitality, liquor as eternal fire poured into eternity to keep the dead forever awake. Scholars, of course, remain divided. Some argue that strong date liquor was common among the poorer classes, who had easier access to date palms than vineyards. Others insist the sheer abundance of fruit required made it more of a luxury, a feast day indulgence rather than a daily habit. The truth might be both. Perhaps in lean years it was rare, and in abundant ones it flowed like a river. What is certain is that it left its mark. Traces in jars, stains in papyri, whispers in rituals. You sip again, and by now your head feels lighter, your limbs looser. The sweetness has turned heavy, almost cloying, but you can't put the cup down. Around you, the laughter grows louder, the songs faster, the clapping more frenzied. Someone stumbles to the ground, laughing until tears streak their face, while another dances wildly with arms flung to the sky. It is chaos, but it is a joyous chaos, born from the fruit of the palm, distilled into liquid abandon. By the time your cup is empty, your lips are sticky, your throat hot, and your chest humming. You lean back against the wall, watching the blur of people swaying and shouting, and realize this is Egypt too. Not only temples and tombs, not only solemn rituals and practical rations, but wild nights when people let themselves go, drunk on the desert's sweetest gift. The torches burn lower, shadows stretch longer, and the courtyard pulses with song. You've just swallowed another of Egypt's strangest drinks. A draught of sweetness turned fire, indulgence turned release, life itself fermented into laughter. Your head still hums from the heavy sweetness of date liquor when yet another vessel is pressed into your hands. And this one carries a presence unlike any before. The jar is small, its clay polished smooth, sealed not with fiber or wax, but with a stopper of carefully carved wood. It feels heavier than it should, as though the liquid inside clings to itself, thick and unwilling to move. When you tilt it, only the faintest slosh answers you, muffled and strange. You unseal it, and the smell strikes you immediately. Sharp, acrid, a little sweet, but undeniably chemical. For a moment you wonder if you've been tricked into drinking medicine again. But the priest who offers it to you speaks softly, almost reverently, calling it a tonic for the spirit, a draught that clears the body and strengthens the will. You raise the cup, sniff again, and recognize the faint, stinging edge of natron, the mineral salt the Egyptians used for cleansing, for preserving, even for embalming. You hesitate, your stomach already turning at the thought, and yet, around you, others are drinking it. Grimacing, yes, but swallowing it down as if it were necessary. You steel yourself, tip the vessel, and let the liquid touch your tongue. The taste is sharp, metallic, salty, as if you've just licked the desert floor. It burns in a way that makes you shudder. And yet, when you swallow, the heat clears something in your chest, almost like a purge. This is no festive drink, no indulgence of feasts or festivals. This is a ritual draught, a concoction born not of desire but of duty. Egyptians used natron for everything, to preserve their dead, to wash their clothes, to scrub their bodies clean. Why not too to cleanse from within? You imagine priests recommending a small dose before ceremonies, to purify the body, to ready the spirit for contact with the divine. Around you, the air grows quieter, more solemn. People sip without laughter, without song. Their faces are serious, eyes lowered, lips pressed thin. It feels less like drinking and more like confession, each swallow a penance, each grimace a sign of devotion. The courtyard hums with low chanting, the sound vibrating in your chest as the salty tang burns in your belly. And here's the peculiar detail. You overhear someone whisper that natron tonic was believed to drive out evil spirits, that its sting could scour the soul as thoroughly as it cleaned linen. Imagine believing that every shudder, every cough, every tear forced from your eyes was a demon fleeing your body. It makes the discomfort almost bearable, turns suffering into salvation. But scholars still argue, was this drink truly consumed, or are we misinterpreting residues of natron found in ritual jars? Some suggest Egyptians would never swallow what they used to embalm their dead, insisting these mixtures were symbolic, offerings rather than beverages. Others counter that in small diluted doses, natron could indeed be drunk, and that ritual cleansing demanded both inward and outward purification. The truth is unsettled, debated as fiercely as the liquid now swirling uneasily in your stomach. You sip again, though every instinct screams against it. The taste is harsher this time, your tongue curling away, your throat tightening. Yet you swallow because something about the solemnity of the crowd compels you. The warmth spreads again, different from beer's comfort or date liquor's fire. This warmth is sharp, austere, bracing. You feel lighter somehow, as if a weight has been scraped away from inside you. The torches hiss as the night wind picks up, carrying smoke and chants into the darkness. You sit among them, lips burning with salt, chest vibrating with the ritual, and you realize this is Egypt at its strangest and most profound. They could turn even minerals into drink, even embalming salts into a tonic for the living. Another strange draught swallowed, another glimpse into a world where life and death, body and spirit, were never separate things. The last swallow of the natron tonic burns as it slides down, leaving your lips dry and your throat raw, as though you've swallowed the desert air itself. You set the vessel aside, and the silence of the courtyard seems to stretch long and thin. People around you bow their heads, some with eyes closed, some with palms pressed together, as though the act of enduring the drink was itself a prayer. It wasn't meant to delight, it was meant to strip you down, to remind you that even bitterness, even discomfort could be sacred. You lean back, the salt still prickling your tongue, and your mind flickers through everything you've endured tonight. The honey-sweet beer that soothed, the onion concoction that scorched, the brine that twisted your stomach, the lotus that lifted you into haze, the resin that clung like smoke, the pomegranate that stained you crimson, the vinegar that made your eyes water, the date liquor that left you dizzy, and now this. Mineral fire that cleanses more than it nourishes. Each one strange, each one unforgettable, each one a glimpse into how the Egyptians lived, healed, worshipped, and endured. The debate lingers in your head. Were these concoctions made simply because the Nile's heat forced creativity, or because the people truly believed divinity swirled in every jar? Did they drink because they had no choice, or because the act itself bound them closer to the gods? The question remains unanswered, and perhaps it always will. The empty jars whisper no secrets, only echoes of what was once poured into them. The crowd begins to disperse slowly, their steps steady, their faces serious. Some smile faintly as though relieved. Others clutch their stomachs, still grimacing from the burn. You feel both, humbled by the harshness, oddly strengthened by surviving it. And in that moment, you realize this last draft completes the circle. Egypt's drinks were never just about quenching thirst. They were about transformation. They made the weak feel strong, the sick feel healed, the ordinary feel sacred. The torches gutter low, their flames shrinking to embers, and the night air cools around you. You let your eyes close for a moment, your body heavy with all the flavors you've carried. Strange, bitter, sweet, sour. They've all left their marks, and together, they tell the story of a people who turn necessity into meaning, survival into ritual, and even minerals into life-giving liquid. You draw a slow breath, steady and deep, and as you exhale, the lingering taste of salt seems to fade at last. Another sip has passed, another lesson swallowed. Egypt has shown you its strangest cups, and you have emptied them all. The courtyard fades now into silence, and with it, the sharpness of every strange drink you've endured begins to drift into memory. Your body feels heavy, settled, as though the Nile itself has curled around you like a long, slow tide. The salt and smoke, the sweetness and sourness, they all blur together until they are no longer tastes, but echoes, soft impressions slipping away with each breath. You imagine the river at night, broad and silver under a patient moon. Palm fronds sway gently in the breeze, their shadows stretching like fingers across the sand. In the distance, a heron lifts from the bank, its wings slow, deliberate, almost dreamlike. The world has quieted, and so have you. The Egyptians turned necessity into ritual, survival into meaning. But here, now, you don't need to swallow anything else. You've tasted their world, felt its strangeness, and carried it long enough. Let it all dissolve like salt in water. Your breathing grows slower, your body lighter, as if you've been unburdened by the very act of remembering. Each inhale is the river flowing in. Each exhale is the desert air carrying everything away. The torches in your mind gutter low, their smoke curling upward until only embers remain. And beyond those embers lies quiet, endless quiet, as steady and comforting as the sand beneath your back. The story is over now, but its calm remains. You are safe, held by stillness, cradled by time itself. Let yourself drift as the Nile drifts, slow and unhurried toward the horizon. Tomorrow will come, but for now, there is only the hush of ancient voices fading into dreams.